We open up, I'll acknowledge. Thank you. We're kicking off our second day of our 423rd meeting, November 18th. I'll state the agency, Department of Environmental Quality's mission is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. Before we jump into the agenda today, I just want to check in with Interim Director Felden and see if there's any adjustments to the agenda, or if we can jump into.
I think so. Thank you, Vice Chair. We are good to go, and I know that our first presenters are in.
Great, thank you. And so I will be chairing the meeting from here as Chair Kathleen George is joining us remotely today. But we will jump into our, I guess I can gavel us in, I see all commissioners present. We'll jump into our first agenda item, actually, item E, action, hazardous waste program rules. And we'll turn it over to our presenters, Lydia Emer and Ellie Brown.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair George and members of the Commission. My name is Lydia Emer, and I'm the Land Quality Division Administrator, and I have the privilege of introducing today's presentation. Stephanie, are you going to bring the presentation up?
Yes, and thank you. Apologies, just a little technical difficulty on my side this morning.
Didn't want to get too far ahead of everything.
Thank you for your patience.
I appreciate you taking care of us. Okay, so the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency authorizes the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to operate the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act's hazardous waste program in lieu of EPA. State authorization is a rulemaking process where EPA delegates the primary responsibility of implementing the RCRA hazardous waste program to individual states. Authorized state RCRA programs must be at least as stringent as the federal program and are not allowed to adopt any rules that would make their programs less stringent than the existing federal requirements. This process ensures national consistency and minimum standards while providing flexibility and discretion to states in implementing rules. To retain this authority, we must periodically review and adopt new or amended federal rules to continue alignment with the minimum required standards of the federal program. DEQ last updated its rules in November 2021. In that rulemaking, DEQ incorporated most federal rules enacted through June 30, 2020, with one major exception, the amended definition of solid waste rule. DEQ is now proposing to adopt this rule. The decision to propose adoption of this federal rule without the less stringent hazardous secondary material exclusion was not made lightly. The full extent of the environmental impact resulting from this exclusion is unknown at this time, and so we proceed with an abundance of caution. You'll hear more about this later in the presentation. Many thanks to the very, very many people throughout our statewide hazardous waste program who contributed their expertise, tenacity, and collaboration to get us to this point in the rulemaking process. I'll now hand the presentation over to Ellie.
Ellie, you need to go off mute. We can't hear you.
I am off mute.
We just heard you.
Okay, great. I was like, I am off mute. What's happening? I just pushed the buttons on my computer, woke it up. It's a little sleepy this morning. We both, myself and my laptop, got in to Portland quite late from a EPA training in Chicago last night.
Come back.
Thank you for letting me know. Stephanie, do you want to move to slide 2 for me? Thank you so much. Okay, so again, thank you, Lydia. Good morning, Chair George and members of the Commission. My name is Ellie Brown. I'm a hazardous waste policy analyst and the lead on this rulemaking. So Lydia already told you a bit about definition of solid waste. And to be clear, this rulemaking package has 3 separate components. So adoption of EPA's amended definition of solid waste rule, which Lydia has already mentioned. 2, implementation of Senate Bill 57, which passed in 2021. And 3, correcting 2 errors in previously adopted rules. Next slide, Stephanie. So before I discuss the 3 components of this package in detail, I'd like to just provide an overview of our rulemaking process. So DEQ convened the Hazardous Waste Rulemaking 2022 Rules Advisory Committee. The selected members reflect the range of entities directly and indirectly affected by the proposed hazardous waste rule changes. Representatives consider the technical, fiscal, and economic impact of the proposed rules. Efforts were made to represent numerous sectors, including public, private, nonprofit, and communities facing environmental justice issues, as well as small and large businesses statewide. The committee met once on May 9, 2022. Public engagement throughout our process has included GovDelivery bulletins to approximately 30,000 email addresses, as well as posting our analysis, meeting notes, and supporting documents to the public website for this rulemaking, and inclusion of advisory committee announcements to DEQ's calendar for public meetings. We opened a 45-day public comment period on July 18, 2022, and held 2 virtual public hearings on August 17 and 18, respectively. We filed public notice with Oregon Secretary of State for publication in the August 2022 Oregon Bulletin. We notified our partners at EPA, our Rules Advisory Committee, and approximately 25,000 interested parties through GovDelivery. We also emailed key legislators to inform them of this. Next slide. So the first component of this package addresses the amended federal definition of solid waste. This rule defines which hazardous materials are waste and which can be recycled. If a hazardous material can be recycled, it's no longer considered waste. These regulations have been subject to numerous legal challenges since the 1980s, with subsequent changes to the definition of solid waste. So generating hazardous waste is costly because it can easily be very dangerous. Hazardous waste must be managed safely while it's on site. For example, employees need to be trained and provided with personal protective equipment, and proper containers need to be purchased and maintained. So being able to recycle hazardous materials translates to a cost savings for generators because it means materials are not waste and therefore not subject to hazardous waste fees for generation, transportation, and disposal. So recycling of hazardous material keeps it out of landfills and conserves natural resources. You know, recycling is a good thing, but only if it's done properly. So the catch in recycling hazardous materials is that they remain hazardous. It remains a potential threat to people and the environment. This is why proper oversight is so necessary. If we adopt the exclusion promulgated by this rule, any and all hazardous materials could be managed under the conditions of the exclusion, meaning they're no longer subject to RCRA. This means that DEQ's hazardous waste program would no longer have oversight. We would have no idea if these materials were being mismanaged unless and until something goes wrong. And our program is meant to be proactive and protective and not reactive. With the distinct exception of this hazardous secondary material exclusion, these federal regulations do provide regulatory certainty and a common sense framework to promote the legitimate and voluntary recycling of hazardous secondary materials. Removing barriers to recycling this material is good for business, it's good for the environment, it conserves natural resources, reduces waste, saves energy, reduces costs. We want to promote legitimate recycling and we want to keep Oregonians safe while we're doing it. There are elements of the definition of solid waste rule that we are required to adopt in order to maintain Oregon program authorization, as well as discretionary components. This rule applies to about 550 regulated hazardous waste generators in Oregon. Examples include manufacturers, businesses, healthcare facilities, and universities. This rule does not apply to hazardous waste generated by households. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Thank you. So DEQ proposes to adopt the required elements of the definition of solid waste rule, and I'll talk through each of these now. So aligning Oregon's definition of hazardous secondary materials with the federal standard. This alignment creates a class of materials subject to new and more protective recycling standards and ensures we have authority to implement and enforce standards. Adopting the 4 characteristics that define legitimate recycling and the requirements for documentation to ensure transparent compliance and to ensure DEQ has access to these records. Defining sham recycling to provide further clarity to the regulated community when it chooses to recycle hazardous secondary materials. Adopting requirements for speculative accumulation.
Ellie, can I just chime in real quick? Sometimes your audio is just getting a little faint, and I don't know if there's any movement, but I just, at times it gets just a little faint. And makes it a
Move
little
my
audio.
laptop closer to myself.
Please, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know. Okay, is there anything that you would like me to repeat, or would you like me to go back at all?
No, keep going.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right, thank you. Okay. So we would like to adopt the requirements for speculative accumulation of hazardous secondary material to support safe and appropriate storage of this material for legitimate recycling. Defining what it means to be a hazardous secondary material generator to ensure that Oregon can implement and enforce these recycling standards and regulations under pre-existing exclusions. Defining facility and generating facility. This change revises existing terms and ensures alignment with the federal rules. And then lastly, adopting enhanced documentation and tracking requirements when a generator seeks a variance from specific regulatory requirements. This federal rule also includes additional variance process requirements, including a 10-year review and approval cycle for all variances issued after this rule adoption. Next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so there are 2 rule elements that are less stringent than current Oregon rules, and DEQ proposes to not adopt these and instead maintain Oregon's more protective regulations. So the first is, of course, the hazardous secondary material exclusion, which I introduced earlier in this presentation. This exclusion is a discretionary part of the federal rule because it is less stringent than our current Oregon rules. So after careful consideration by the Rules Advisory Committee, we propose EQC does not adopt this exclusion. If adopted, the existing recycling exclusions would remain, and they would be enhanced by the required elements of the definition of solid waste rule. So the second element of the rule that we propose to not adopt is the federal definition of contained. Instead, we recommend adopting a more protective definition of contained, one that retains our current standard of limiting hazardous waste management in land-based units to only permitted transfer, storage, and disposal facilities. Next slide. Thank you. So as I've stated, adoption of this rule is mandatory. However, we only need to adopt those pieces of the rule that are more stringent than current Oregon rules. Our advisory committee confirmed there would be upfront costs to both DEQ and the regulated community upon adoption of this rule because generators need to do some work to come into compliance, training employees, and DEQ would also need to do some work to help them with that by providing technical assistance and education, such as public trainings and fact sheets. But these additional upfront costs would only occur if a generator chooses to recycle hazardous secondary material. They're not compelled to do that. The committee determined the fiscal impacts would be offset by increased clarity on what constitutes legitimate recycling. This clarity will lead to better management of hazardous secondary materials, which will decrease the likelihood of spills or releases to the environment. A decrease in incidents results in fewer enforcement actions, which is good for business as well as DEQ. And better management also results in increased protection of human health and the environment. So DEQ received 1 public comment in response to our proposed adoption of this rule. The comment was from a member of the regulated community. They requested that we not adopt the definition of sham recycling, which is a required component of this rule, and that we do adopt the new hazardous secondary material exclusion. So we declined to change our adoption proposal for reasons heard earlier. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to part 2 of this rulemaking package. The second component of this package implements legislative direction. In 2021, the Oregon legislature approved streamlining and modernizing DEQ's hazardous waste disposal fees for eligible materials sent to Oregon's only permitted RCRA hazardous waste landfill, which is Chemical Waste Management of the Northwest, located in Arlington. The legislature at that time set new fee rates and removed outdated and complex fee schedules. The legislature also added language granting EQC the authority to modify these fees in rule, which is consistent with how other agency fees are handled. And it will also allow DEQ to be more responsive to economic conditions and changes in disposal volumes that generate receipts. Today's request is to define these fees in rule and set current fee rates in rule. Next slide, please. So under this proposal, EQC would approve amending our rules to establish statutory definitions of disposal fees with the current fee rates. Our advisory committee confirmed there would be no fiscal impacts associated with this rule amendment, and we received no public comments on this proposed change. Next slide. So just as a reminder, you, the commission, approved a set of federal rules in November 2021 that allowed Oregon to maintain its authorized RCRA program. And today we're proposing 2 corrections to those previously adopted rules. So firstly, we propose changing the 60-day notification period to 30 days within the generator improvements rule. This change will align Oregon with the federal timeline and allow generators to move hazardous waste off-site more quickly. Experience to date demonstrates that program staff are able to meet this turnaround time. The second proposed technical correction is to remove the phrase "or hazardous waste pharmaceutical" from Division 12 enforcement rules related to the adoption of the Federal Management Standards for Hazardous Waste Pharmaceutical, which is also known as the PhRMA rule. This was just a typo, and it would not change how this rule is currently being enforced. Next slide, please. So under this proposal, EQC would approve amending the 2 rules that are listed on this slide. Our advisory committee confirmed there would be no fiscal impacts associated with these corrections, and DEQ received no public comments on these proposed changes. Next slide. So this concludes our presentation to you today, and we're available to answer any questions you might have at this time. Any questions for us, commissioners?
And for me.
I see Commissioner Addington has a question.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Could you just, when you were talking about the comment, the public comment, and you just broke up a little bit on me there. Could you just revise or say again what you said there about the comment and why you chose not to adopt it?
Yes, Commissioner, thank you. So we did receive one single public comment in response to the way that we proposed to adopt definition of solid waste. So there were 2 main points in that comment, and it was from a member of our regulated community, so an entity that generates hazardous waste. So they firstly asked us to not adopt the definition of sham recycling, and not adopting that definition is really not an option for us. That is a required component of the rule. And they asked that we do adopt that new hazardous secondary material exclusion. And for the reasons that we've outlined in our proposal, we declined to change the way that we're proposing to adopt this rule. We did respond to that public comment, and you can see our response in the staff report. And I mean, it should be noted that that is the only public comment we received, and our advisory committee was very much in support of the way that we're proposing to adopt this rule.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Director Inner, Director Feldman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ellie, might just help for clarification. Can you remind us for the comment about the hazardous secondary material? The way that part of RCRA is being operated in Oregon right now is not changing with this rulemaking. That's the way that that rule is already implemented in Oregon, and that is not changing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Leah. So under current Oregon rule, generators are allowed to do recycling of certain hazardous secondary materials. We encourage that. And what's really exciting about this rule is that there are new requirements that make those pre-existing exclusions even safer and more clear. So if we choose not to adopt this exclusion, nothing changes about the way that recycling of those materials works currently.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm seeing if we have any other further. So do we have any other further discussion on this item? We have a motion. I think in a second here, Commissioner Slusser will make the motion.
Oh, okay. I move that the EQC adopt the proposed rule amendments as seen on pages 30 through 45 of the staff report for this item as part of chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Cobb.
Okay. I think Commissioner Cobb beat you to it, Greg. All right. Any further discussion? I think that was the order. I don't see any. All those in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The motion passes. Thank you, Lydia and Ellie. I think we're ready to move on to our next agenda item. Item F, it's an action item, air quality permitting program rules. Does Stephanie let us know if we have our presenters, Ali and Jill, with us?
Yes, thank you. This is Stephanie Caldera, the Commission Assistant. I am just bringing in Ali Mirzakalili, Air Quality Division Administrator, and I'm looking if Jill Inahara, the co-presenter, is on our Zoom. I don't believe she is. So I would ask Ali just to check in and see if Jill is intending to join in person, or if you will be leading this as the sole presenter today. And sorry, just one note, Ali Mirzakalili, if you are able to unmute and note if you'll be the sole presenter for item F, the air quality permitting updates, or Jill Inahara, who is the co-presenter. I also see Tim Wollerman, who is the manager within this program, who should now be able to present his notes. So thank you, Tim.
Hey, Stephanie, just a quick note. Jill and Ali are on their way down right now to be in person.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we'll just give this here a momentary pause here as folks get situated. We are running maybe a minute or two and a minute or two fast. That's perfect.
Oh, did you get in here?
Good morning, Jill. Good morning, Ali. Whenever you all are ready, Stephanie's got the presentation queued up.
Outstanding. Morning, Vice Chair Barraza, morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ali Mirza Khalili. I'm their Quality Administrator for Oregon Department of Air Quality, Environmental Quality. Sorry about that. I've trying to get my thoughts organized here. Yeah, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present the 2022 air quality permitting rulemaking. With me today is Jill Inahara, who will walk you through the details of the proposal. And I have Tim Wollerman is the interim manager, is available online if I need to call a friend. I will, please allow me to do so. Yeah, but before we get started, I just want to acknowledge and thank the people who are involved in the RAC process, our Fuel Advisory Committee and Fiscal Advisory Committee members. They graciously gave us a tremendous amount of their time and expertise and energy, thought leadership, and got us to throughout the rulemaking and helped us get to where we are. We also want to thank the number of commenters that provided us thoughtful feedback in the process that helped us be where we are on the proposal. Again, the insight and feedback was extremely helpful and again gave us reason to finalize that, make some changes to our proposal. I will explain our walkthrough. Our proposal, we're proposing to update, clarify, and improve our air quality permit program. And I just want to call this is the what we bring in before you a sort of foundational stepping stone. I think this is we'll explain. I think this is the first step. I want to make there are changes that we are as a result of the comments that we received and some of the thinking that we did through the in response to that is we need to reconsider certain things and bring it back to you, and we intend to do that. So this is considered a part one, please. So we'll be back. So we have some policy changes that strengthen the permitting program, streamline the rules, and improve our permitting process. We're making some technical changes to clarify the program and the rules, and we have some correction of typographical errors that will walk you through all of that. So, like I said, what the pivot we made is from I think when we presented to you in the information session, we talked about the minor source emission reduction technology that we were incorporating and trying to embed that with existing rule structure proved to be extremely complicated and difficult with the way, and we'll talk about it, and I'll be ready to answer questions about that if the Jill's explanation doesn't clarify those, but we want to talk about that. That's the part that we delayed, and we're not incorporating, I'm not presenting to you, and we'll talk about that. So with that, I'm just go ahead and turn it over to Jill, and go ahead, Jill.
Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barraza, and Commissioners. Nice to see you guys again. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Well, it's really weird that she's not in here. This is the agenda of what we'd like to go over with you today. We're going to start off with our minor nuisance review consideration, talk about our public engagement and our response to comments, the proposed policy changes, this proposed streamlining and process changes, proposed clarifications, and we'll end with the effective date of our proposed rulemaking. Please feel free to step in with questions along the way. Next slide, please. So what we presented as part of the rulemaking package during the September informational session, we are proposing to start a specific rulemaking for the minor news source review program in 2023 after more discussion. EPA recently initiated a review of minor news source review programs across the country. They held their first meeting on October 27th to inform air agencies of their intent to strengthen these programs. And those will probably result in more regulatory requirements for states. DEQ needs more time to work closely with EPA to ensure that our program meets EPA requirements. Environmental advocates and industry stakeholders held opposing views to add a minor news source review program to our existing permitting framework. DEQ will further engage with Oregon stakeholders on the development of this program. We are committed to environmental justice. We want to develop a program that will require further emission reductions, particularly in communities that are underserved and overburdened with a disproportionate impact from air pollution. The minor news source review program and the resulting emission reductions are important for Oregon and for EPA. Further discussions will give us time to consider all of these aspects to improve the rules so our approach ensures compliance and protection of the national ambient air quality standards, and it'll be more in line with other agencies. So the remaining portions of the rulemaking package will be presented to you today for your consideration. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So next, I want to go over our public engagement and our response to comment. We held 4 Rules Advisory Committee meetings, and at each of those meetings, we allowed time for public input. We held 1 Fiscal and Economic Impacts Committee meeting where we accepted input on our fiscal impact statement. Slide, please. So the input from the Fiscal Advisory Committee was based on the fiscal and economic impact statement that included the minor news source review program. There will be no control technology fiscal impact because we're going to propose that news source review program later on, but there will be continued, there may be fiscal impacts if a source has to install controls for NAAQS compliance. They do the modeling and find out they're not complying with our national ambient air quality standards, there may be controls required. So like Ollie said, the proposed rules are a scaling back of what we presented in September. And that will lower the fiscal impact on sources. But there will be a continued fiscal impact because we are still requiring modeling for these type 3 NCs. And there will be a new fiscal impact that because we're going to be adding a requirement to model type 2 NCs. And I'll talk about that more later. But we're planning to develop a modeling tool similar to what we did for Cleaner Air Oregon Level 1 risk assessments. This will streamline the modeling for type 2 and type 3 NCs and will minimize the fiscal impact of that modeling. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So we sent out over 22,000 email notifications to interested parties. We allowed for 1 public notice extension. We provided over 2 months of public notice, and we held 1 virtual public hearing where 2 people commented. No, it was virtual. They commented. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So we got, there were 23 commenters, both individuals and organizations. They provided 99 individual comments. There were 32 changes made in response to the comments, changes to our proposed rules. 8 changes were not made because of the minor news source review reconsideration. There were 5 comments that did not need any action by us, and there were 22 comments where we agreed, but no change was needed to the rules. Next slide, please. So next, I want to go over the proposed policy changes. So the proposed policy changes are to eliminate generic plant site emission limits. We want to change our type 1 notice of intent to construct approvals. We want to require air quality modeling for smaller increases in emissions. And we want to eliminate the ability to operate without pollution control devices for 48 hours. Next slide, please. So generic PSCLs were adopted in 1988 as part of our streamlined permit process improvement team rulemaking. The reason that the generic PSCLs were set just below the significant emission rate is because under our current rules, The source can request an increase up to the significant emission rate without having to do modeling or control technology analysis. And as a reminder, the significant emission rates for the significant emission rates are 40 tons per year for nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxides, and VOCs, 100 tons per year for CO, 15 tons per year for PM 2.5, 10 tons for PM 2.5, 15 tons per year for PM 10. So right now, under our current rules, the source can ask for increases up to those amounts without having to do a control technology or any modeling. All they have to do is request an increase, and we would have to provide public notice for that increase. So with the adoption of the short-term NACs, we can't say if sources with generic PSCLs are complying with the short-term national ambient air quality standards because they don't have to do any modeling right now. For the reasons listed on the slide, we are proposing to eliminate generic PSCLs. The elimination creates permits that more accurately reflect actual emissions. It provides more regulatory certainty. It avoids over allocation of air resources. It provides more transparency for communities, and it allows DEQ to review air quality modeling to ensure compliance with the short-term national ambient air quality standards. Sources and permit writers currently calculate their emissions to see if they can fit under the generic PSCL. So that's work that's already being done. It's not new additional work. Next slide, please. So the next policy change is for our notice of intent to construct rules. We've had issues with our NC rules that have been extremely resource intensive, so we want to propose some changes. We decided to propose that all type 1 NCs will be notice and go. This will streamline the process for both DEQ and sources. This will enable DEQ to focus our time on higher emitting equipment. A source can request review of their emission calculations, and we will have 30 days to review those calculations instead of the current 10 days. 10 days just wasn't enough to process those. Sources can make these changes without a review process, but they do so at their own risk. The other things that we want to propose to clarify our NC rules are we want to clarify the emissions calculation methodology. We want to clarify that emissions thresholds apply to individual pieces of equipment, not the entire source. We want to clarify that no plant site emission limit increase is allowed under an NC. Those require public notice. And we also want to require that all construction commence within 18 months of approval. There was a source that submitted an application before the Cleaner Air Oregon rules were adopted, so they could be an existing source with higher risk limits, and they still haven't constructed now up to today. So, but they're still permitted. So this requirement to commence construction within 18 months will eliminate those kinds of incidents. Next slide, please.
Jill, I've got a question.
Yes.
And so will this apply to that existing entity, or this is moving forward? It would apply to future entities in terms of the commencement within 18 months of approval?
It'll apply to all NCs that are submitted after the effective date of the rule.
And when with these clarifications here, these are just clarifications of existing approaches and practices that the agency has already had in place.
Correct, except for the type 1 change. That's the big policy change for NCs and the modeling.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. DEQ cannot issue construction approvals or permits to any new or modified sources that will cause an exceedance of the national ambient air quality standards. This includes construction approvals under our NC program, our Notice of Intent to Construct program. So the proposed rules will require modeling for type 2 and type 3 Notice of Intent to Construct applications. We are adding that type 2 modeling requirement based on public notice. Just to remind you, type 2 is for emissions that are over our de minimis emission rates. So our de minimis emission rate is 1 ton per year. So equipment that's over 1 ton per year will be required to be modeled. Even though the modeling is required only for the new piece of equipment, it will give DEQ an idea about the rest of the facility and if a more immediate call-in for short-term NAS compliance is warranted. So as I told you in September, we are behind Idaho and Washington on this modeling requirement, but this will put us probably definitely more in step and probably more restrictive of what we require modeling versus what they require modeling. But we will still be a little bit behind on the control technology requirement, which will be to you sometime in the future. Next slide, please. The last proposed policy change we want to present is about excess emissions. We have rules that regulate emissions that are in excess of any rule or permit condition. So excess emissions can occur during startup or shutdown of equipment, during scheduled maintenance, or during breakdown of equipment. So that's process equipment and pollution control equipment. So we propose to eliminate the ability for a source to operate without pollution control devices for 48 hours. That's currently in our rules. We want to propose mandatory immediate shutdown, except for these scenarios. If the shutdown results in employee injury, equipment damage, or emissions of shutdown and startup that are higher than those of continued operation. So an example of where emissions of shutdown startup would be higher than continued operation would be if a two-field electrostatic precipitator loses one field. There will be excess emissions in that case. So if you shut down the furnace to repair that field, then it would result in a cold start of that furnace. So that would be a period of time when there's no controls. The ESP can't operate under a cold start. So if we allowed that furnace to keep operating with one field in place, then they could repair the second field. So those total emissions would be less than if they shut down completely and started up again. Next slide, please.
I'm going, Jill.
Okay. Next, we're going to go over the proposed streamlining and process streamlining. We propose to extend simple permit terms from 5 years to 10 years. Sources that are on simple permits tend to change less than sources that are on more complex permits. These are things like boilers, natural gas transmissions, surface coaters. A 10-year permit term will require less work for sources and DEQ, but both can make changes mid-permit term if we need to. Like if there are new rules that come into effect, we can add those. They do want to change their facility, they can do that. But they just won't have to renew every 5 years. It'll be a 10-year renewal cycle. Next slide, please. We want to propose no expiration date for construction permits that must be incorporated into Title V permits. So construction permits are the regulatory basis for some Title V conditions. Source-specific limits like best available control technology are established in the permit itself. They're not established in our rules. So an example of where we needed this proposed rule was when a construction permit was issued for normal operation only. After they started operating, we found that we had to establish different limits during startup and shutdown. So because those limits were established in the construction permit, we had to go back and reissue that expired construction permit, change the construction permit, reissue it again, and then incorporate it into the Title V permit. So there was a lot of extra steps that this proposed rule changing will eliminate. Next slide, please. Oh, you got it, Stephanie. Thank you. We want to propose requiring a more complete permit renewal application. So right now, many businesses are allowed to submit a streamlined application and say that there were no changes made since the last renewal. But sources that are more complex, that are on our standard ACDPs and on our Title V permits, they usually make changes during those 5 years. So with the current streamlined applications, permit writers often don't have a complete application to do the renewals. There's a lot of back and forth asking for information. So requiring a more complete application at that renewal will save some time and help us process permits faster. Next slide, please. We are proposing to expand the use of short-term activity permits for temporary operations in addition to unexpected and emergency activities. An example of where the expanded use of a short-term activity permit is when the Forest Service wanted to assess the use of air curtain incinerators. Since it wasn't unexpected or an emergency activity, we allowed it under a mutual agreement and order, even though it wasn't an enforcement case. So the expanded use of the short-term activity permits will give businesses more flexibility, but they will also ensure compliance with all of our rules. Next slide, please.
Can I just,
Yep, Commissioner Sasha, thank you. Sorry.
Could you just expand on that a little bit? So the short-term activity permit is as stringent as a regular permit, but it only covers an activity that is short-term.
Yes, yes. Commissioner Slusher, it'll be for 60 days. So if, and we did provide for one extension if it's needed, but they would have to apply for that. But yeah, it's just for something that's short term.
But it's not less protected.
No, it'll include all the requirements that they have to meet, our general opacity and grain loading. They will, if it's a permitted facility, they will have to include those emissions when they show compliance with our plant site emission limits. So it's not like they can just discount those emissions. They do have to be accounted for when they report.
Thank you.
Mhm. Next slide, please. So next we'll go over the clarifications to our rules. So we want to clarify the effective date of our permits. It's going to be on the signature date unless a contested case hearing is requested. And we want to make some clarifications to our permit categories. Some of them are unclear. These are for molded plastic container manufacturing, motor coach manufacturing, and we have a catch-all category 85 that kind of, it's based on emission thresholds. We want to clarify how those emissions are calculated for that catch-all category. We want to clarify that Title V permittees must pay NC fees, notice of intent to construct fees, and construction permit fees through our ACDP program. Sources cannot construct under a Title V permit. They have to do that outside of the Title V permit, and they have to pay the fees for those construction approvals. Right now, permits can be terminated if the renewal application isn't submitted on time or if fees aren't paid on time. So the rules clarify if and when those permits can be reinstated. And last, EP added 1-bromopropane to their list of hazardous air pollutants. This is the first edition since the list was initially adopted in 1990. So 1-bromopropane or 1BP, it's used in solvent degreasing, adhesives, furniture foam fabrication, and the aerospace industry. Dry cleaners switched to 1BP because they thought it was an alternative green solvent when perchloroethylene or PERC was banned. But it turns out that 1BP is classified as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. So that's why they added it to the list. There is only one user of 1BP in Oregon. They use it in a parts cleaner, and none of our dry cleaners use 1BP. That won't have much effect in Oregon. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So the last thing we want to talk to you is the effective date of our proposed rulemaking. We want to propose an effective rulemaking and implementation date of March 1st, 2023. This will allow DEQ to finalize all of our implementation materials based on our final rules if you agree to adopt them. And it will also give us time to plan and execute training for DEQ staff and the regulated community. After the effective date of the rules, the proposal to eliminate generic PSCLs and the changes to the notice of intent to construct rules will apply to all sources that submit applications on or after that date. New sources will receive source-specific PSCLs. Generic PSCLs will be removed from existing permits at their first renewal after the effective date of the rules. Sources that have generic PSCLs, they already operate under their capacity or their potential to emit. So unless they want to operate at higher levels than they currently are now, there might be some permit modifications involved, but we don't anticipate many of those. We didn't want to hold training in December because of the holidays. So March 1st will give us time to finalize all the materials. This includes new application forms, instructions, permit templates will need to change. We want to update our websites and we want to train staff and our regulated sources. So there will be a smooth rollout of these rules. So I'll turn it over to Ollie for closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill. Really, thank you. I have to, if you allow me, please, commissioners, I just want to take the opportunity to really acknowledge the hard work that Jill has put into this process. I think, the engagement, it's been over a year, 18 months process, the number of public meetings, the RAC meetings that we've had to prepare for and engage, respond to comments. Again, that's been tremendous amount of work and wouldn't be here without Jill's, dedication and thoughtfulness and putting up with me. Going iterating was what I called it. So,
We're not done
I'm an iterative thinker, and so this is with this iteration, as you can see, what we bring before you is a little different than what we proposed before the public, and it's part of that iteration. And then we're responding to the comments that we received from the public, and it's sort of reflecting on what I mentioned during the information session, which is a balancing of our resources with the workload that we anticipate. And it's just we couldn't shoehorn that minor source emission rate technology at review in the existing structure. We have the whole NC structure is, we need to revisit that. And that's what we intend to do. And I commit to bringing the RAC together. And hopefully they'll be willing to engage with us again, the same members or others. I think the advocacy community, hopefully they can bear with us, and the regulated community as well. So we need to bring them back together, and I'm anticipating probably be a 12 to 18 month process to just sort of redesign and rethink how our minor source permitting is done to center it on environmental justice and disparate impact to address those issues in a thoughtful way without creating additional burdens to the communities and to our stakeholders. So with that, again, I want to thank you for the feedback you've provided us and allowing us to proceed here. Just restate our commitment to address those disparate impact and equity issues in our permitting. So again, appreciate the opportunity to present to you, and I think welcome any question and feedback you have for us with the motion.
See, Commissioner Addington.
Thank you. And thanks, Jill and Ollie. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I tried very hard to get through this staff report and a lot of the public comment, and it's I admit it's really, really challenging to do that. And it's one of those situations where it's just a lot for me to try to digest and just understand from a lot of different perspectives. So I really find myself dependent on, the staff expertise. And so I appreciate you taking the time to go through this. One of the things I think a lot of you know is that my sort of, my approach to a lot of these issues is to try to find a balance between these necessary environmental protections, but also maintaining viable, economic situation for businesses and industries that provide products we all need and jobs for many people. So that's how I sort of approach this, and I always appreciate the RACs and how you've handled those. Specifically, Jill, just it seems to me in some of the comments there was a lot of comment and or confusion around notices of construction and when those are required, particularly whether or not it's required for routine, repairs and maintenance and that kind of thing. I wonder if you could just touch on that for me and just tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure, Commissioner Addington. So basically, any source, even if they have whether it's permitted or unpermitted, if any facility wants to construct in Oregon that's going to pollute the air, and they need to come and tell us about it. And they do that through this NC, this Notice of Intent to Construct process. That's our NC process. So again, it's for unpermitted and permitted facilities. We have different levels, like it depends on how much emissions the equipment will have type 1 is for the lowest amount of emissions, and type 2, it gradually goes up. But you're right, there was some confusion on whether routine maintenance requires a notice of intent to construct, and that was not our intent. We did not, we don't want to know if they're, whenever a facility is doing their routine maintenance, we don't want to, that would be overly burdensome for everyone. So we clarified that that is not required in these proposed rules. We did, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
And we did clarify that if they're replacing a piece of equipment, like if they're replacing a boiler, even though it could have lower emissions than the old boiler they're replacing, we still need to know about that because some of the rules might change for that new boiler. So replacements have always been covered under our NC rules, and there's been some confusion on that part of our rules. So that's much clearer in these proposed rules that replacements do require notice.
Thank you. And Jill, I just echo what Ollie said. Sometimes I don't always know the right thing to do here, but I certainly can recognize a lot of very, very hard work. And so thank you. And thank you for going through this.
Thank you, Commissioner Addington.
Commissioner Slusser.
Thank you. Yeah, I really want to thank you for all the work that you put into this. It is tremendous amount of work, clearly. You provided so much information in the staff report, which is really helpful. And also, as Commissioner Addington noted, a lot to take in. And these are complex issues. But I think that this does reflect a really good balance between the needs to be as protective as possible while also easing some of the administrative burdens for sources and for the agency. And so I really appreciate your consideration, your balancing there. And I also really appreciate the proposal to eliminate the generic PSCLs. I think that has created problems for many years, and I really appreciate that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Slusher.
Okay, well, I just want to say similarly, there's a large body of work here and clearly a long review and a lot of diving into many different parts. And I just recognize that taking the pause on some parts of this and acknowledging that it needed more work and deliberation it's a big acknowledgement. And I thank you for that. And I'm eager to see what that sort of turns out as you do the crosswalk to see how to address some of those minor sources. Okay. Do we have Interim Director Peldon, please?
I just, thank you, Vice Chair. Just wanted to kind of just restate. I think Jill and Ollie have done a really nice job figuring out the policy changes that are needed in Oregon in our air permitting program, and there are several. And this, I think, scaled back approach for the time being also reflects that. Even if we know the right place that we need to go or have a vision for that it's going to be a lot of change, and that change isn't just for the regulated entities, it's for our staff too. So I think they've done a really nice job in determining what we can move forward with now and what pieces do need a little bit more time. There are just some basics when you change processes in terms of informational pieces that are out there, web pages, templates, forms that folks fill out, and just getting the word out so that people really understand what's changing. And of course, importantly, whether or not it has an economic impact. So I think bifurcating this, I just wanted to note, is a really good idea both for our staff and the regulated community. And of note, you saw in September, all of the policy concepts are out there. So folks have an idea of, where we need to go next in the discussions. And some of this we're also seeing nationally as EPA begins to review state minor new source review programs. And so that'll aid us as we move forward as well to start to see what are these expectations that EPA is going to have of our program. So I think we'll be able to wrap that into the discussions that we start up again with the RAC.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Okay, well, looks like we've got our motion up ahead in front of us on the screen. It's maybe a little more challenging on this side to read because there's a little, it's being blocked in our screen a little bit, but I want to see if we've got a motion, if someone wants to make a motion. Commissioner Sasser.
I move that the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission adopt the proposed rule amendment seen in attachment A as part of chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules with an effective date of March 1st, 2023. Approve incorporating these rule amendments into the Oregon Clean Air Act State Implementation Plan under OAR 340-240 and direct DEQ to submit this SIP revision to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Kyle. Commissioner Schlesser makes the motion, Commissioner Kyle seconds. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor vote by saying aye.
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 Okay, all those opposed? Okay, then motion passes. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you.
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
I look forward to
Continuing
continuing.
next year.
As they say, we'll be back.
Well, I know we're running a little bit of schedule. Director Feldman, how do we want to?
We do have our next presenters here. If it would be beneficial to commissioners, we could take a 5-minute break and just and take a quick break. That's not a problem at all, either way, really.
I am a fan. Oh, I see a hand up. I'm a fan of breaks. You can take a quick break and I see a hand. I don't know, Greg, if that's what you, if that's Commissioner Eisen, if that's where you're going. But maybe let's hear it. Commissioner Eisen.
I just want to say today in particular, I'm a very big fan of ahead of schedule. So I get to drive to Salem tonight. So
okay.
but
Okay,
breaks are
then
fine. I need them too.
Do you want to take?
Let's take we'll keep us on. I'll take that note. Let's just because I put it out there now, I feel like I'm compelled to give that folks that little break. So let's take a quick 5-minute break here, maybe come back at 10:18 and then we'll start back up. Okay, thank you.
During the break, our recording will be stopped. And for those in the
It's the room down the hall.
EQC meeting room, we will have you on mute and we'll re-record when you reconvene in just a few minutes. Thank you all. Is on her way in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, we're going to pick things back up here with the next item on our agenda. It's an informational on the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Department of Environmental Quality, Water Quality Memorandum of Agreement on non-point source pollution. Looks like we've got our presenters here. So welcome, Jennifer and Isaac. We'll turn it over to you both.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. For the record, my name is Jennifer Weigel. I'm the Water Quality Administrator here at DEQ. And with me, I have Isaac Stapleton, who's the Program Manager for the Agriculture Water Quality Program at Department of Agriculture. Today, we're going to talk to you about the work that the two agencies have been doing over about the past year to develop an updated memorandum of agreement between the two agencies on our water quality programs. As I noted, we've been working on this for quite a while. And so today we're going to talk to you about the work that we've done to develop this revised interagency memorandum of agreement. This agreement does reflect our collaborative efforts to align the two agencies' water quality programs and requirements. Today, we will be providing you with a brief background on our coordination. We will provide an overview of the revisions to the memorandum of agreement. And as you've noticed in your materials, you do have the proposed final memorandum of agreement that's attached to your staff report. We'll also talk about the summary of the public input we received on this memorandum of agreement and how the agencies responded to those. Also attached to your staff report is kind of the full comments that we received on this memorandum of agreement and responses. A response summary by the various kind of different topics that we received as part of that comment process. So next slide, please, Stephanie. So just as by way of a bit of background, ODA and DEQ have had a memorandum of agreement around the implementation of our water quality programs since 2012. At that point in time, that memorandum was focused on our cooperative roles for evaluating the effectiveness of Department of Agriculture's agricultural water quality program and biennial updates to their agricultural water quality management area plans. And so that was the focus back then. Of course, these programs have evolved a lot since that point in time. And so one of the basic things that we also wanted to ensure is that we reflected kind of not just how DEQ participates in Department of Agriculture's programs, but how Department of Agriculture participates in DEQ-led water quality programs. I think as everyone knows here, DEQ does have broad authority for implementing the Federal Clean Water Act in Oregon and a lot of responsibilities and requirements in doing so. But also the legislature has directed the Department of Agriculture to develop plans and rules to prevent and control water quality pollution related to agriculture activities. And also as part of that, that those programs should be working toward achieving and maintaining water quality standards. And so with this MOA, what we strove to do with these revisions is really to be able to describe how those agencies would work together, how those agencies participate in each other's programs that they have responsibilities for leading, ensure that captures our respective authorities and requirements, and that ultimately, of course, that those efforts are targeted at protecting and improving water quality associated with agricultural lands and agricultural activities. So with that, our 2022 update, we think will ultimately improve non-point source pollution control through our collaborative implementation through our respective programs. And one of I would say the largest space that we dedicate space to in the MOA is really around both the agricultural water quality program that ODA leads and also implementation and development of total maximum daily loads that DEQ leads. Next slide, please. So just kind of a brief timeline on this slide here. As I mentioned, we've been working over the better part of the last year on this. And prior to these efforts, we do have regular and ongoing collaboration at staff and manager levels between the two agencies. So in addition to our concerted efforts on this, we've had ongoing staff and manager coordination on the ongoing implementation of our programs. As we've been going through this process, we added a more focused time between our two agencies, including Isaac and I, our managers and respective staff on this. And we met monthly, really talking through all of the significant issues and the different areas that we thought were important to include in this next revision. We also had engagement with our commission and board liaisons. So some conversations there, shared some early drafts before we went out for public input. We also recognize that because these programs aren't necessarily completely linear and transparent on their faces, we developed a collaborative process flow chart that we thought would be helpful in describing kind of how some of these processes work and how the agencies participate in those processes. The updates to the MOU also capture program and process changes and better achieve water quality goals. As I noted, our programs have changed in a lot of important ways since in the last 10 years, both for DEQ and for ODA. We wanted to ensure that those were reflected there. In August, late August and into September, we held a 30-day public notice where we sought input on the MOU. And then ultimately over the last couple months, we've been evaluating that public input and making some targeted revisions to that draft MOA, which is what you have in front of you today. So just in summary, I just want to highlight a few of the things. Oh, sorry, next slide, please, Stephanie. Just highlight a few of the important updates. So as I noted, there was a number of, one of our objectives here was to ensure that this MOA reflects current roles and responsibilities and authorities related to TMDL development and implementation under both state and federal law. We also added information on existing compliance and enforcement processes. That's an area where the agencies have been coordinating regularly over time, but we recognize as we read through that older MOA, it wasn't addressed in there. And we thought that was important for transparency to capture our existing process, and which is that, ODA is the lead on enforcement. for water quality as it relates to agricultural lands and activities. There are often times where it's not as cut and dried in that. And so sometimes DEQ has an interface on those enforcement activities as well. And so we have had a long history of being able to coordinate where those two jurisdictions overlap and having handoffs when those become necessary. So this MOA is intended to capture that existing coordination and not alter that coordination, but really to ensure that that's captured here. Another piece that we included was ODA's efforts on strategic implementation areas, which is an aspect of ODA's program where they have focused water quality program implementation initiative, where they screen certain areas based on water quality and other aspects and do some focused programmatic implementation. So that was a piece that didn't exist back in 2012. So we included that and also described how DEQ would engage in that process. We also added information on how the agencies would evaluate progress and adaptively manage toward meeting standards and related goals. And third, we introduced a process for ODA to develop TMDL implementation plans in addition to adapting area plans and rules. So in that process, as folks know, oftentimes when we do a TMDL, a lot of the relevant management agencies will develop management plans that describe how they will implement activities and actions toward meeting a TMDL load allocation. Department of Agriculture receives a load allocation for agricultural lands and activities. And historically, we had pointed to the Agricultural Water Quality Management Plan, which includes revisions or reviewing the agricultural area plans and rules every 2 years. And we had just pointed to that process. This new MOA describes a tighter coordination between the two agencies where if we do not expect the TMDL load allocations to be met by the more general agricultural water quality approach, then ODA will either adapt their area plans and rules to serve as an implementation plan, or will develop separate TMDL implementation plans, which would then be incorporated into relevant plans and rules at a later date. And so one of the things about this is that, so for example, where we have broader geographies where TMDL covers a larger geography, such as the Mercury TMDL that we have in the Willamette Basin, right now, ODA is working on an implementation plan to cover that broader geography, which then in subsequent rule and plan reviews and revisions that would then be incorporated as appropriate. And where the geographies are more closely aligned with the TMDL area, we will have discussions with ODA about which approach is going to make the most sense, whether it makes more sense to revise the area rules and plans because there's a nice geography overlap, and or to do a broader implementation plan. And the other piece of that is that as part of this process, then we will also be working with ODA as well as our other designated management agencies to do reporting and reviews on an approximately 5-year cycle, which is our goal for all of our TMDL areas, is to look at, what's occurred, what's happened over the last 5 years, how do we adaptively manage based on what we've seen occurring in the basin and adapt those implementation plans going forward. Next slide, please.
Jennifer, we've got a question from Chair George.
Sorry.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, for this overview. It's helping. I wanted to just pause as we talk about TMDL implementation. And you mentioned kind of 2 paths that could be taken, either adjusting existing plans that may have some geographic alignment, or developing, I guess, implementation plans. Now, my understanding is that those implementation plans, TMDL, best management practice implementation plans, they need to be submitted back to DEQ for review and approval. So would that be consistent with either one of these approaches? And then second, are there time-based benchmarks so that DEQ can have some certainty about, the reasonable expectation of implementation.
Thank you, Chair George. In terms of the implementation plan approach, typically when we have implementation plans that designated management agencies develop, we attach an 18-month time frame for the development of those implementation plans to be submitted to the agency for review and approval. The timeframes that we're working on with ODA in the Mercury TMDL are approximately on that same time frame and consistent with the other designated management agencies that we are working with. I would expect if we're going down a different path and we're identifying the implementation plan to be more closely aligned with, to be kind of dovetailed with the rule and plan revision. We'll have to think about exactly how that gets captured. If ODA is writing saying, we are going to do this, our implementation plan is to revise our area plans and rules within X amount of time. Exactly whether that goes, oh, DEQ approves that. I think we want to be in that place where we work on that together and arrive at that same place. In terms of in any event, the expectation also that we have within any implementation plan, whether we are looking at the area plans and rules on their own or whether it's something else, the other piece, that important piece of that we use with all of our designated management agencies and working through things is understanding what are the commitments to milestones and activities and what kinds of reporting based on the types of activities will then feed back into that process for the adaptive management. And so that is the same principle here that we're talking about with Department of Agriculture. Do you want to add anything to that, Isaac?
No, I think you captured it well. I guess the thing I would add is that the area plans and rule revision timeline is set for every 2 years, but the agency is able to not be held to that. We can update those plans and rules outside of that schedule so early, for example, if appropriate for a TMDL. So it'd be discussions that we would have with DEQ on that implementation process.
Thank you. And I appreciate Jennifer, you mentioning and stressing the importance of the collaborative effort of the working together of our various agencies, as we know that's key to success. And that being said, so if plans don't come in 18 months, or if they do, but then not a lot seems to be changing on the ground, what recourse or what process is there to kind of bring people to the table and review, how we work with folks on the ground to really get best management practices implemented?
Thank you, Chair George. In the MOA, I'm just pulling up in that section of the MOA, we highlight kind of that dispute resolution. So in the event that there is a dispute, and I think in this instance, what you described would be the type of thing that we would consider here if there is a dispute between the agency where DEQ feels that that those actions that we've agreed to and that in terms of either submission of an implementation plan or actual execution of that plan, and that can't be resolved at my level, at our director level, we kind of go through this elevation process, and ultimately there is the statutory provisions that do exist for the commission to be able to petition ODA for a review for part or all of the area plan and area rules. So I think that is the process that we would expect to use in those circumstances should they arise.
Thank you.
Jennifer, can you just help contextualize that 18-month timeline for developing those plans for me in terms of the broader TMDL and any other elements of just helping me understand how that fits within that broader picture?
So Vice Chair Barrasso, is your question more about kind of how the 18, what do we expect to see during that 18?
Yeah, exactly. Between that 18 months and then following afterwards, so that we get a sense for do we expect essentially a plan to be produced and then we're already redoing the TMDL. I just wanting to understand the life of that 18 months in the broader life of the TMDL so that we can it gives us an opportunity to understand, maybe not necessarily this commission, maybe a future commission, on when we start, setting the stage for, okay, these are the things we should expect to see along this trajectory within this watershed.
Got it. Vice Chair Barroso, and maybe it'll be helpful just to talk a little bit more about the Willamette.
Yep.
Because that's a place where we've put a fair amount of effort over really about the last 15 years or so. The Mercury TMDL is more recent, but we also have a temperature TMDL that's been in place since around 2006 or so. And so we've been actively implementing there. So what generally the trajectory would be, we develop a TMDL, we identify the responsible entities that need to develop an implementation plan. We typically give them 18 months to develop that plan once the TMDL is issued. There's a lot of draft sharing that goes back and forth in that 18 months, with the objective that at the end of the 18 months, we have something that DEQ feels comfortable with. And then the expectation is then that is then initiated and implemented based on the timelines, milestones, activities that are included in those implementation plans. In the Willamette, we've been doing 5-year reviews where we ask the relevant agencies to say, okay, so we're going to collect data. We're going to collect what actually the progress on those activities and what results have we seen. So bringing together relevant either monitoring data or other types of metrics that are appropriate for action. So in some cases, we may not take Mercury, for example, we're not going to see dramatic in-stream changes in a real quick time period, but there are ways in which we can track X amount of riparian areas restored, X amount of activities that have reduced sediment runoff. So there may be other types of measures that we can monitor against to understand performance to plan, basically. And so every 5 years, looking at what's been done, what were some of the barriers to implementing things as planned, what's been successful. And then at 5 years, we've asked entities then to look at their implementation plans and adapt based on experience and outcomes, so that then we have a next 5 years going. And we've been doing that in the Willamette. We've done 2 5-year reviews there. And so our goal is, as long as we can have the staff to support all of that, that would be kind of what we would expect to see. I would say our recurrence cycle on TMDLs is not so fast that we would expect to kind of be through implementation and be immediately revising those. I think a lot of our TMDLs, particularly the nature of the pollutants we're looking at, temperature, mercury, we are really looking at, several decades worth of efforts in order to fully implement and see the benefits of those restoration efforts within a particular basin.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's the broader, because the timelines are long, and when we talk about 18 months and 5-year review, and by the time things get moving, we might not see appreciable differences just because of the timescales that we're talking about. So it just keeps coming back at our level, at a commission level, being able to have things that we can see so that we can be able to appropriately, again, at that 30,000-foot level, chime in and be able to provide guidance and direction so that we can be able to see, those signals that things are improving and those actions are being taken. So that's going to be something I know that I keep thinking about in this role, and I'll stop talking there, but it's something that I want to come back to see how are we able to have appropriate measures on our side that we can track, because those timescales are so large.
Right. And thank you for asking the question, Vice Chair Barroso. It's absolutely right. And I think measuring progress in more than one way is really important, because, like you said, we may not see in-stream effects immediately, but we can also track, there's other ways to track progress. So whether that's, trees planted, it takes a while for the trees to grow, but if we know we've X miles of riparian restoration has occurred, that's really important to know, even if we know we won't get the full benefits from those efforts for another decade or two. Similar with mercury and how mercury cycles through kind of food chain effects. Again, we may be able to point to activities that help reduce erosion and sediment, but we may not. That improvement in fish tissue, mercury values may be kind of a lagging indicator based on efforts that are actually happening on the ground. So thinking about how do we measure in more than one way is really important. Okay, next slide, please. And so just the last couple of things in terms of things that were included in this MOA that were updated, to your points, Vice Chair Parasso, is thinking about how do we continue to build methods and capacity for monitoring and evaluation of the progress that we are making. We actually have a really long history with ODA about bringing data into our conversations and looking at status and trends and having that inform conversations that we have around water quality. And lastly, looking at how do we increase accountability and transparency through periodic reporting on how we're working on these implementation efforts. And bringing some of those periodic conversations here in this forum and also with the Board of Agriculture. Next slide, please, Stephanie. One of the things I did want to highlight on this slide too was just a little bit more about the adaptive management process. You've got an excerpt here of the flow chart that's attached to the MOA. And so just wanted to highlight about, there are things in the, I guess that's the Kelly green boxes there. Things that DEQ is doing not just with ODA, but broadly. So in terms of implementing kind of basin-wide monitoring strategies, and then how ODA's intent, the plan is for ODA to nest in those activities in terms of the work that DEQ is doing more broadly with all the folks in the basins where we're working on TMDLs. So, and I think we already talked about the other piece too, in terms of how we would do those periodic reviews and compile monitoring data, not just monitoring data, but other information that's relevant to understanding how that basin-wide implementation is going. Okay, with that, next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Isaac to talk about the types of input that we received on this.
Good morning. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm Isaac Stapleton, the Natural Resources Program Director for ODA. We did put out the draft MOA for public comment in August and received back several comments, 299 comments in total. However, only 12 of those were unique and individual comments. 288 of those were a form letter that the agencies received that were all the same. So I think there was a broad representation of both ag interests as well as environmental interests. And we did also receive one comment from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. And so we'll talk a little bit about the comments and revisions that we did receive. As Jennifer mentioned, you should have that full comment report in your packets. Next slide. So in response to the comments, we did make several revisions, about 11 changes total. A lot of those changes came around clarifying information that was in the original draft, such as better aligning the language with the statutory and rule language that was existing. Better clarifying, that's not good English. Clarifying the enforcement responsibilities and where those overlap and where they don't. So making it clear that joint enforcement actions would be only where those would overlap, and where ODA had specific authority for enforcement, it would be ODA's role, or vice versa for DEQ. That was something that came out. Additionally, I think there was some concern about changing of authorities in response to the language that was in the MOA. So we clarified that this MOA does not alter or limit any existing authorities that either agency currently has. I think making the language more of an active voice throughout the MOA was another point of concern that we addressed. So, next slide. So there were several comments that we didn't make revisions in response to. Certainly there was an expression of support for the MOA, which is always nice to see in public comment. People supporting the work that you're doing is great. But there were also things that didn't necessarily relate to the work of the Ag Water Quality Program or DEQ's Water Quality Program, such as concerns or comments around confined animal feeding operation permits, air quality, the desire to have more detail around soil and water conservation districts and local advisory committees in the MOA. they were not party to the MOA. It's between ODA and DEQ. So we left out that level of detail. They are mentioned as parties, but not directly between the two agencies for the work that we collaborate on. And then there was also, I think, some desire to have more detail in the minutia about how things happen between the two agencies, like on the ground. The document's really meant to be a high-level document of how we collaborate together, so we didn't make any changes there. And then there were also some comments that we received about concepts that were already in the MOA, so we didn't obviously respond or make any changes in relation to those. So next slide. So where we are at now in the process, Jennifer and I presented the same information to the Board of Agriculture on Wednesday. We are here presenting today to you. The next step in the process would be for the agency's interim directors to sign this, hopefully by the end of December. And then the two agencies would continue forward on the collaborative efforts that we've outlined. So I think with that, we open it up to questions.
Commissioner Slusser.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. I don't have a question. I have a comment. I just wanted to say that I think that the flow chart is really helpful. I'm personally like a very visual learner, and I found this to be really easy to follow and provides a lot of information, but in a way that was really easy for me to understand. So thank you. And I encourage you to create more flow charts. Second that.
All right.
Any other discussion on this? Okay. Chair George.
Thank you.
And then Commissioner Addington.
Okay, so I just had a couple of things I wanted to ask about. One was in reviewing the comments and the response to comments, I did see one area that the Umatilla tribe really stressed was the importance of floodplain management and restoration beyond just, the riparian zone. I think, on the west side, we're very oriented, and for some good reasons, around riparian zone and shade restoration, things like that. But in many parts of Oregon, especially on the east side, where you don't have normally shade dominated streams in a lot of cases, and it's that hyperrheic flow that really is what stabilizes and cools stream temperatures. So that is understandably very important, and they've done a lot of really great research on that. Now, in my thinking that through, and you help me if this isn't correct, in my thinking that through on a basin by basin basis, whatever the TMDL that's developed, and then the kind of best management practices that come as recommendations that flow from that TMDL work, it seems to me like that would be the place in the water quality management plan, maybe initially, followed by, for example, the Department of Agriculture's implementation plan. It seems to me that that's the place where those issues could really be addressed. But I wanted to just raise it to you and give you the opportunity to share a little bit about that if you see that differently.
Yeah, Chair George, the point that you highlighted around floodplain restoration, recognizing the importance of hyperrheic flow, and even going so far as to understanding they also provide kind of those cold water refuges for fish, et cetera. That can be for certain systems a really important part of restoration. I think that has a thread that goes throughout both the development and implementation. So one, when we go in and actually are doing our evaluation, do we have data and information that we can actually use and modeling techniques in that particular area and data to be able to model out those aspects, right? So I think it's going to be probably a little bit variable from location to location, what we have in hand to be able to understand, where those areas have been lost and where they need to be restored. We have looked at that kind of thing in some of our TMDLs where we've had that information and would bring that out. And then I think also the TMDL itself, one of the things we try to do within a TMDL is understand what are some of the most important priorities for restoration within a particular watershed. And so then that goes into the implementation plans themselves. So what are the priorities for restoration? Where do we get some of the biggest uplift for certain types of activities? And then looking at the various DMAs and their implementation plans and how do we bring those things together? So for example, in that kind of an instance, it may be conversations between DEQ and ODA saying this is really important in this space. And, you know, if there are certain geographies or certain sorts of funding that we could like collectively channel or focus in those areas, that would be a priority for implementation around that. We also do try to have some funders at the table when we're working through both kind of implementation at the time of TMDL development, kind of broad strokes, so that our partners like OWEB, soil and water conservation districts, watershed councils, we try to bring some of those folks into the table during TMDL development as well, so they have a sense of what the priorities are so that we can kind of get collective movement around those priority areas. So I think it shows up in actually both the development of the TMDL and water quality management plan, in the implementation plans themselves, and then actions on the ground. I think that kind of thing shows up in all three places.
Thank you. Thank you for just spending a little more time to kind of walk through that, where that shows up. And then the other question I had was, I was hoping maybe Isaac could share with us a little bit. We know that a focus of a lot of really good work with the Department of Agriculture has been in those strategic implementation areas. And the EQC has even had the opportunity to go out and on the ground and take a look at some of those projects and some farms and where folks have done some good work as part of that SIA identification and kind of really targeting areas. So we know that that's been a good program doing good things. For me, part of this MOA, I think, is hope from moving from just the focus on the SIAs to needing best management practices, you know, basin-wide, where we have TMDLs and water quality management plans. So could you speak to us a little bit about how you see kind of moving from, and again, I don't think that the SIAs are going to go away, right? That's its own process and a very valuable process, but maybe speak to how you see either the relationship or the expansion of work going from just kind of an SIA model to a basin-wide TMDL best management practice implementation model.
Yeah, Chair George, thanks for the question. I think, yeah, SIAs have been a great component to the water quality program. They've been successful. But I think, you know, part of the way that we select an SIA, we take the various data and look for areas where, you know, it's pointing to where we can make the biggest impact or there's the biggest need. And so I think TMDLs are certainly part of that selection and evaluation process of where do we target next for an SIA? What is the SIA going to focus on in terms of with our partners for achieving water quality outcomes? So, you know, tying into those TMDLs if appropriate for a basin. And so really, I think they work really well together in terms of an approach to not only for like the TMDL implementation plan, but then on the ground work through the SIAs to ensure that we are seeing the changes that we want to see.
Okay, and is there any because you know I'm just trying to think this through. Could you share with me a little bit? So for TMDL basins, right? You've got a TMDL, you've got a water quality management plan, and you know there's always multiple designated management area agencies that have been identified, and in some cases, you know, agriculture is going to be one. So for areas outside of SIAs, what are kind of the mechanisms of working with the community and getting that engagement? And on a basin to basin basis, the recommended best management practices might differ, but you know, how do you see that? How does that roll out in terms of engaging the community and doing some education and helping them connect with potential funding resources? You know, that's kind of side of it. Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, for that, thanks for the question. I think for that, a lot of what we rely on is the soil and water conservation districts for that education and outreach through their implementation of the area plans. So they're really the folks on the ground educating folks, working with local landowners, helping them achieve whatever that area plan outlines for the goals. ODA comes in, obviously to support that. We have staff around the state that support those districts in that work. But I think the heaviest lift is really by the soil and water conservation districts on the ground. And through the support of ODA, through funding and through our local area specialists in the regions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Addington.
Thank you. Jennifer, Isaac, thank you very much. So actually just something Chair George said made me, I just had a little question about designated management agencies as it pertains to agriculture. I didn't think that was the case, other than perhaps if we're talking about irrigation districts, but for working lands, it's not a DMA, is it? That's doing any sort of implementation work.
Commissioner Addington, in this context, Department of Agriculture is the designated management agency.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yep, that answers my question.
Okay.
So just probably this is more of a comment than anything else, but I would be interested in your input or your take on it. And I might not have this exactly right, but I'm old enough to go back to when some of this started and remember the importance of having the Department of Ag engaged in water quality on working lands, because, you know, just of the sort of, there's probably some landowner trust issues, understanding the practices, you know, knowing how to work with landowners. And so when you think about these lands and rural landscapes with waterways coming through them, I mean, I think that the vast majority of producers want to do the right thing. They want clean water on their land and healthy fish populations. And I think it can be overwhelming when you talk about the water quality and you see the water quality standards, and it looks like things are not in great shape. And I just, I think for landowners, the way they process things, I mean, to me, if you have water coming into your property, that water should not be in worse shape when it leaves your property, right? And if we can get it in better shape, then that's good. But to me, let's make sure that we're working with those landowners to make sure that water quality does not degrade as it goes through their property. But to me, beyond that, that's where those incentives come in, and the soil and water conservation districts, and perhaps help from OWEB. But that's where those big changes need to be focused, whether it's the stream flow or changing the way a stream operates or things like that. But am I thinking about that right? Because to me, that's something that landowners can think about, right? I better not be doing anything to make this worse. If there's things I can do to make it better, I'm all ears, but I don't want to get beat up over that either.
Yeah, Commissioner Addington, I'll address it a little bit and then I'll let Isaac add as well. I mean, one thing that we always try to talk about in that regard is, you know, entities are responsible for what's happening on their land. They're not responsible for solving somebody else's actions or inactions upstream, right? So in-stream water quality is always a bit tricky because it flows, right? So what you're seeing at any point in time is a cumulative effect of any other disturbances, inputs, whatever that's happening upstream. So just because you stand at the edge of in this instance, you know, a property and take a sample and go, oh, it's not good. It's not good enough for dissolved oxygen. It's not good enough for temperature. Well, it's not just about what's happening where you're standing. It's about what's upstream as well, right? So sometimes when we look at water quality and you look at the adjacent land ownership, that's not a one-to-one relationship. And we don't assume that. We know that it is that is a cumulative piece of it. And so, you know, the approach and the philosophy that we try to take is that people are responsible for what's happening on their property. And they're not, you know, we're not asking people to, we don't expect landowners to address what's coming into their stream, but we do also recognize it's that there is a collective responsibility. There is usually, typically when you go to watersheds, there's a lot that needs to happen in lots of different places throughout a watershed in order to restore that water quality. So I think when we look at the DMAs, we're looking at a broad swath of land ownership, a broad swath of activities, and collectively what needs to be done and how is that prioritized. I think some of the tricky things when we get into, there are some more straightforward types of cause and effect relationships for some types of pollutants and conditions. And then there are other conditions that are definitely more complex that require a greater degree and a broader degree of cooperation to address. So some of the things you alluded to, Commissioner Addington, whether that's been historic, stream straightening, channelization, removal of floodplain. I mean, those definitely require, it's not unlikely to be a single landowner who engages in that to fix that kind of stream issue. That's definitely, more often than not, a broader cooperative effort, which may include multiple landowners because it does abut their property to be engaged in that, and would likely need to bring in a lot of different partners, funding sources, et cetera, to be able to get those kinds of restorations. Definitely a lot of things that we're trying to address are very complex issues and require some pretty broad partnerships in the most kind of dictionary definition of the word in order to solve some of them. And Isaac, please.
Yeah,
please.
Commissioner Addington, I think you're right. I think we see when we do our strategic implementation areas, we have an open house. We invite all the landowners that are in that area to the table to have a discussion about what we're looking at and what we're doing. We evaluate every single tax lot within the SIA aerially, and then we ground truth it and invite those folks into a room. Not just the folks that may have a problem on their property, but just generally everyone. And what we routinely hear is an interest in the work that we're doing, an interest in protecting and preserving the environment on their property through their operations. They do value their lands, and they do want to make sure that what they leave for their next generation is better than what they had. And so I think that is definitely a sentiment. It's not universally true. And obviously that's where enforcement comes into play. But I think, it's definitely a sentiment that we hear routinely from producers.
And then just one more. I also think there are some times when water quality standards are just not going to be met. And whether that's temperature, whether that's an area like the Klamath Basin with phosphorus, again, it doesn't mean you don't try, and it doesn't mean that you don't do the right things. But can you just talk to me about a use attainability analysis and how this new MOU will it affect that? I understand that should hopefully be the exception and not the rule, but just talk to me. Is that still a thing? Has this changed that at all? Or
Yeah, Commissioner Addington, this MOA doesn't change. I would say it doesn't fundamentally. I say it's neutral with regard to that option and that approach that exists within our water quality standards to adjust the standard where we would find that it's not attainable. There are a number of instances where it may come to a point where we understand that maybe it isn't attainable, and that's something that's appropriate to look at. To date, where we've used that tool has been more along the lines of there's one instance where we did use it in near the city of Hermiston for an irrigation canal where it had fish uses, and that particular canal does not have fish. And the water quality was not expected to coming from that canal. There was very little water coming from that canal into a receiving water body. And what was coming there, we did not expect to have any impact on important aquatic life pollutant parameters and criteria. So in that instance, we did look at what those standards were for that canal, remove the fish use for a large section of it. And, you know, in that case, we felt like that was an appropriate type of action for that, for the facts that existed for that irrigation canal. I know there are interests in looking at that in other situations. I think everybody knows irrigation canals are unique in terms of their fact sets and how they interact with neighboring water bodies and what they look like there. That's something that comes up fairly often. In those kinds of instances, I think our process would be to engage collectively with folks to understand, you know, how is it used? What are the, you know, what's the data and information we have around it to understand if that should be changed. In some cases, if we, you know, have efforts in place for a period of time and we're like, we learn more about what's attainable, then I expect we would have, that those conversations would come up and we would want to engage in them. For us, I don't know that that really is directly related to this MOU we have with agriculture, because ultimately that's that really would occur through a water quality standards rule revision. And so there's a lot of folks around that table that we would engage in that process, including, you know, Department of Agriculture. One piece in this memorandum of agreement we have with ODA, it's also in the memorandum of agreement we have with ODF, is to engage them in any of those water quality standards rulemakings where it has relevance to the work that they do in their water quality program. So we would engage in that way. So not directly around this MOA, but something that would definitely be part of our broad commitment to ODA to engage them in relevant processes in our water quality programs.
Thank you, Greg. And I'll just say, just thank you for this update. I appreciate this work and look forward to seeing this, you know, as we move forward. There's so much that is happening here, and I look forward to the day when we can go back on our field visits and sites to get to just see what some of this looks like on the ground. Clearly, and I hear you, Greg, there's been so much there's been so much good that has also happened, and it's and wanting to be able to celebrate those moments, recognizing there's still quite a ways to go, but not losing sight of that and being able to celebrate that, acknowledge that, because those are good things that are happening. So I know that we're due for a little bit of a break, but we're also behind schedule. And I also heard you, Greg, earlier. Yes, I know, right. So I'm going to turn to Director Felden and let her chime in.
Two quick things, one on this agenda item and one on the next. I just wanted to chime in. Briefly, I think, you know, in thinking about this memorandum of agreement refresh that we've done here, I think what's really sort of the culmination of this is a renewed integration of the tools that we have. So to me, you know, we've had the tools of using strategic implementation areas. We've had the tools of area rules and plans. We have the tools of TMDLs. But I think at times you can look at those pieces as endpoints or places where you stop the analysis or stop the action. To me, what this is really doing, it's a commitment between DEQ and ODA to reevaluate each of those tools and the actions that come out of those and look for where they need to overlap or be woven together better, or where we need to do something again or differently. So I'm really proud of the revisions that the agencies have done with this. And I think it's also important to say that the Department of Agriculture has been a really strong partner in developing this agreement throughout. This has been really a collaborative effort that where both agencies wanted to figure out how do we really ensure that our current roles and responsibilities and expectations of each other in our management of water quality is reflected in this document, that it's really clear for the public and for agricultural folks to see. So I think this is kind of a new opportunity to reinvest in this process and see where it takes us. So thank you to Isaac and Jennifer for leading this process. It's been really good work with a good product. As for the director's report, I believe I can make up a little bit of time. If you would like to take a break, I don't think that report needs to take all the time that's allotted. So I think we can do both.
So can we come back at 11, just a little bit before 11:20, recognizing that Director Feldman will catch us up.
Sure will.
Greg. Okay, all right,
All right.
thank you.
And thank you all. The recording will be paused during this break.
Okay. Thanks, folks, for the break. We're now jumping over to item H on the agenda, the information on the director's report.
Okay.
Director Feldman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso, Chair George, and Commissioners. I will have the director's report there in your materials with several items. I will highlight a few of those for you, and I do think we'll be able to get back on track here. I also have a few of our administrators standing by virtually in the virtual space in case we want to get into some detail on any of these, but we can also always take questions and get back to you on some things as well. So the first one I'm going to highlight is the item 1.2 there, medium and heavy duty ZEV infrastructure grant program. So this month we are launching a new $15 million grant program to support installation of charging infrastructure for zero emission, medium and heavy duty vehicles. So this is a result of allocation by the Oregon legislature of one-time funding to help us accelerate our adoption here in Oregon for zero emission trucks and buses by investing into the needed charging infrastructure. So we are thinking back to our presentation from yesterday, with regard to electrification in Oregon. You can think of this as a piece of that pie. And this also supports Oregon's new advanced clean trucks regulation, which this commission approved earlier this year, requiring manufacturers of medium and heavy duty vehicles to sell a certain percentage of zero emission vehicles, beginning with the 2024 vehicle model year. So this is going to be noticed as a grant availability option this month, and we will begin review of applications in January 2023. The funding in this can be used for both technical assistance and capital improvement. So I think at a high level, that just really means that if folks are interested in planning for infrastructure, but aren't quite there yet, they can use this money for some of that planning. For folks that actually have done that planning and are shovel ready, they can also use these funds for capital improvements. So there's kind of a two components there that they can apply for funds for.
I have a question from Commissioner Slusher.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what the size of individual grants will be or what the cap on individual grants will be?
I don't have, I don't have information on the size for individual or the cap. I know Ali is in our virtual space, our air quality administrator. Ali, do you happen to have information on the cap or size of individual grants under this program?
I was frantically looking for that as well. I don't have it in front of me. We'll have to get back to you, Commissioner Slusser. I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Get back to you on that. Okay. All right. The next piece I will note, 1.3, the Klamath Falls particulate matter 2.5 maintenance plan submittal is delayed. So we are delaying the submission of this maintenance plan until the area has an attaining 3-year design value that meets EPA's monitoring frequency requirements. Now, essentially what that means is that we've had local monitors installed, but unfortunately the calibration was biased high. The results are just simply not accurate. And so we have to have accurate monitoring results to submit to EPA. This is all in an effort for the Klamath Falls area, which is currently designated federally as a non-attainment area for particulate matter, to be able to move to the designation of a maintenance area. And of course, that's really important for local industry and businesses that want to either come in anew or make major modifications to their facilities. So we just want folks to know that we are still working towards this maintenance designation with the Klamath Falls area, but we need to get the data to support that. Okay. The next piece I will cover here is the monitoring grant, 1.5. This is a federal ARPA fund and Inflation Reduction Act community monitoring grant. So this, and Ali may be able to give us some more details around this. I'll give you a little call out there, Ali, to get prepared. But this was the results of a tour that Administrator of EPA, Michael Reagan, did. I believe it was called his Journey to Justice tour, where he went around to some different states and to understand the experiences of some communities that were experiencing an overburden in terms of air pollution issues. EPA ended up granting a total of $53 million through this particular community monitoring grant program. And Oregon DEQ made a submission for monies under that program, and we've been awarded nearly $500,000 under this opportunity, which was the typical amount for individual states to be awarded. Tribes also had an opportunity to apply for this, as well as community organizations. Ali, did you want to add anything on this particular program for Oregon?
Director Feldman, certainly. So just real quick, just want to this is we've worked really closely with advocacy groups and partnered with them. A lot of this money supports their actions. We're calling it data into action. So it's a loan library. We're giving essentially monitoring equipment to the communities and helping them to bring in academics and researchers to translate the data and then be able to make some sense out of it. So it's not just monitoring for the collecting data and then scratching your head and say what to do. I think it's sort of empowering the communities to do the monitoring and be able to assess the results and then I think we'll engage with them in finding solutions in a collaborative way as to how we need to address that. So we need to our next thing is to identify the where we're going to zero in on and once we get the grant. So it's going to take a lot of investment of our resources to get this done. So I appreciate the opportunity to apply for this and get it.
Thanks so much, Ali. Okay. Just brief note, item 1.6, not a whole lot to say there, just that it's a little good news bit, and I think it just fits nicely again with the conversations that this commission's been having the last couple of days around electrification and opportunities and monies that are out there for electrification and for the infrastructure needed around that. So as you can see here, in late October, EPA announced $965 million in a clean school bus rebates program across the country. And that federal program is going to continue over the next 4 years, totaling about $5 billion in investments. This year for Oregon, we had 2 school districts that are receiving funding for a total of 14 new electric school buses and the charging infrastructure costs to go along with those. So that's 11 buses in Banks and 3 in Prospect.
Commissioner Susser.
Yeah. Do you know why those school districts were selected?
Ali, did you hear Commissioner Schleser's question there in terms of why those particular school districts, Banks and Prospect, were selected?
I did hear the question, Commissioner Schlesser. Thank you for that. I don't know the answer. I don't know why why not more of the applications were granted. We're also inquiring as to Region 10 actually received less funding. I'm looking at that in terms of comparison to other regions. We think that it had a lot to do with non-attainment designations, perhaps, and they focused on those areas that were actually non-attainment for air quality standards, and probably that drove a lot of the decisions. But maybe that's, by us getting into attainment, we're disadvantaging ourselves in a little bit of the competition here. But so I've asked EPA that question, and we'll get better clarification. But as far as I know, it's the decisions were mainly driven by those criteria, and I don't have the specifics.
And I think we'll be reporting back on this. Obviously, this funding is going to continue, and so it'll behoove the department to understand kind of which criteria they're focusing on so we can take advantage of this funding going forward.
And Commissioner George also has her hand.
Thank you.
Thank you,
George.
Thanks. So Ali, while you are making your list of questions to ask EPA, could we please ask if tribal governments and nations have been notified about this opportunity or provided an opportunity to express their interest? As you said, undoubtedly, they probably have some sort of approach that led them to certain areas, but many tribes do live in areas where a high percentage of the population relies on things like wood smoke and other contaminants that can provide some kind of socially disparate impacts. And so something like getting rid of old polluting school buses might be beneficial. So I would love to see if there can be outreach to the tribal nations in Region 10 as well.
Chair George will certainly do that, and if there is, we'll make sure we reach out to the tribes to let them know when the next opportunity comes up as well.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, item 2.2, the fuel tank size. Just a short update on this, that in July we reported the passage of the new fuel tank seismic stability requirements that occurred in the 2022 legislative session. That was Senate Bill 1567. And we've now had our first rules advisory committee to look at the specifics that will be needed in those rules. The statutory requirements from that legislation prescribe that we come up with rules that prepare for a magnitude 9 Cascadia earthquake event. And there are approximately 17 fuel storage terminals subject to these requirements in the Portland and Albany areas. And so these folks will need to submit facility assessments by June 2024. And we are planning to propose rules for public comment in April, this coming April. And we'll bring these rules to you in the fall, but you'll have an information presentation on this before the rules come to you for proposed adoption.
And can you remind us, this legislation is about assessing the seismic stability. It's an assess. The legislation requires us to assess that stability.
Correct. Yes, and determine if there are some needed upgrades in the event of a seismic event for these large fuel tanks.
The legislation determine meaning we would require them. Determine meaning we would require them as part of the legislation.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We covered the Klamath Dam removal yesterday, and I'm sure some of you in your various commutes or online scans may have seen a little bit about that. So,
Got a question for George.
Thank you. Just quickly, Leah, I don't think we need to spend too much time on it, but the report does mention the EPA approval of DEQ's non-point source management program plan. And of course, that's a funding package as well. So without too much detail, but generally speaking, could you share a sense of where primarily does that funding go in the state of Oregon, or what is the greatest uses of the funding for the non-point source management plan for DEQ?
Sure, Chair George. And I know we have Water Quality Administrator Jennifer Weigel available. Jennifer, do you want to speak to that item number 3.1 that you've submitted for the report on our non-point source management program?
So I think we need to unmute.
Stephanie, is Jennifer able to?
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. Oh, looks okay. It's working now. Thank you. I was trying to clicking and nothing was happening. Chair George and Interim Director Feldon. Yes, in terms of the non-point source management plan, that non-point source management plan is a required component of under 319 of the Clean Water Act, which is really about states non-point source programs broadly. So that is a critical piece for us to have approval of that and continued progress in addressing non-point source pollution. So then, because it's tied to Section 319, it is our non-point source grant program that continues to support. And so we use those funds from EPA in two different ways. One is in which we support some of our DEQ staff, primarily our basin coordinators, who is, as you know, are based in offices around the state and who are really our kind of boots on the ground, developing local relationships around and working on implementing non-point source related activities, both for TMDL implementation and outside of TMDL, where there aren't TMDLs as well. And then also we do have some pass-through grants that we also administer using those funds. So as folks know, those have been a little bit more limited than they were historically, just because of the relationship to our coastal zone non-point source program as well. But we do continue to do pass-through grants for various groups to do non-point source work with those monies as well.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Moving on to item 4.3. This one's a little bit of just a status update and a heads up that the chemical waste management hazardous waste permit. As you may recall, chemical waste management facility in Arlington, Oregon. This is our only treatment and disposal facility in Oregon for hazardous waste. So we are working on a renewal of their hazardous waste permit, and that is done in really close connection with EPA Region 10 when we renew their hazardous waste permit. When we are working on this, really it amounts to a back and forth along the way between DEQ and EPA on different sections of the permit to stay aligned and ensure that that permit is one that meets the authority that we have delegated under the RCRA program from EPA. So staff have been working on this for a while, and we do anticipate posting this draft permit in spring of 2023. This is a permit. There's hardly any other than this, but this is a permit that the Environmental Quality Commission actually approves as opposed to DEQ. So this is coming to you for action, not just an information item. So I know staff would also like to have the commission do a tour of the facility either sometime in the spring or summer before you take that action. So we'll look to set that up.
Director Feldman, can you just share briefly why is this a permit that the commission approves?
This is part of our, well, it's in statute, I believe, that the commission has to approve these treatment and storage and disposal facility permits. I'm looking to Council Gary Fruman, who counsels us on land quality, but it's a statutory requirement that the commission does that.
That's correct. It is in statute that for these sorts of treatment and disposal facilities, the commission issues the permit. So
they're highly regulated. I guess I would just add, and it really does take a special kind of land use and sophisticated operation to run a treatment, storage, and disposal facility for hazardous waste. So I think it's, it speaks to the high profile nature of having this sort of facility in your state and ensuring that the commission gets a view on that.
In this facility, can you remind us, this facility also went through Clean Air Oregon?
They are still in the process of going through Clean Air Oregon. So the Clean Air Oregon program has been processing permits and condition reviews for many new facilities, and then a handful of existing facilities, yes, that have been called in. You're correct, Vice Chair Barrasso. This is one of those existing facilities that's being evaluated that was called in.
And last question, and is that separate? That is still a separate but parallel process, or just a separate process from this hazardous waste permit approval?
That's a good question. So the hazardous waste staff are working on the hazardous waste permit renewal, which is really what's highlighted here. But it is worth mentioning they are also going through an air quality permit renewal at the same time. Now that permit would be approved by the department. And the Clean Air Oregon process that they are going through would inform conditions in that renewed air quality permit. It is a good point though, in terms of public process, we are going to have to figure out, how do these two processes come together for the public? I mean, it would not be outstanding that, if you have a public process going for the hazardous waste permit, that questions of air quality could come up and vice versa. So we will need to figure out the best way to make this digestible, I think, for the public, and just, make sure it's an efficient process.
Yep. And as someone who knows that things about this, I went immediately there, and then you just said it. I was like, oh yeah, they're separate, but yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a few updates here on item 4.4, the Lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area. We will continue to update the commission on this area. It's an area where we've got a lot of work. We have a lot of different areas of work going on here. So I think you can expect to continue to see this. I think one important facet that I just want to note when we're talking about the La Guama, yes, you've seen a lot in the media around the Port of Moro and their permit renewal and modification and the enforcement actions there. But, all of La Guama is not just the Port of Moro. So I think that's just something kind of important to remember, that this region was declared a groundwater management area several decades ago, and that there are many facets that come into play in that area. One of them that's noted here is the La Guama Committee. So by statute, when an area is designated as a groundwater management area, DEQ is responsible for forming a local advisory committee that is supposed to really represent the different interests and folks that would be impacted by that groundwater designation, and come up with best management practices and solutions. And this is much broader than the enforcement or permitting scope that you would see DEQ having for some sources in the area. Our permitting and enforcement, really comes down to those sources that are land applying industrial wastewater. The local committee is really there to look much more broadly. What kind of agricultural practices, for example, could we be using in this area to reduce the impact that irrigated agriculture has on pushing nitrate into the groundwater? So I want to just emphasize it's a multifaceted conversation when we talk about groundwater management areas. There are different agencies that have responsibilities, Department of Agriculture, DEQ, Water Resources in terms of actual water rights and allocation. So it's a broad conversation that we're involved in. And you do see highlighted here a couple of DEQ specific pieces around Port of Moro and Lamb Weston. And as I said, we have a responsibility for the permitting for those facilities that land apply industrial wastewater. and of course, enforcement responsibilities around that. This local committee is noted here. While the committee has been intact for some time, we have given it a bit of a refresh to ensure that different interests are represented on this committee, and that we can really, have some of the conversations that need to be had, including around drinking water. As you may recall, in particular, Morrow County had declared a state of emergency around drinking water there. So of course, that also brings into the conversation the Oregon Health Authority, who runs the drinking water program in the state of Oregon. So it's a large, multifaceted effort, and we'll continue to bring you updates just around the different pieces that are happening at any particular time. But I think you will continue to see it's going to take some years to really make progress in that area, and we are going to keep doing our part.
Please,
The
Commissioner Schleicher.
So how big will the committee be now with those 11 new?
So it is 11 voting members total.
Oh, that's total.
Yes.
Okay.
It's ensuring really it's that the categories,
Gotcha.
are representative of different interests. So it's ensuring that there's a representative for environmental justice issues. It's ensuring that there's tribal representation. It's ensuring that there's scientific input.
I would just, I think as the body of work and the work the agency is doing builds, and it's been in existence, but as it builds to this place, at some point it'd be helpful to, I think it'd be helpful to bring together some of the different actors and maybe even some members of that, maybe whether it's that committee or just some of the different representative groups to just, given that this is going to continue to, we've seen this in the media enough that it'd probably be worthwhile for us to, I don't know if I get the sense there's not a commission action on this. And so these are updates, but at some point it may be helpful to bring that so we can better understand that to the commission.
Yes, Vice Chair Barrasso, I think that's a great idea. As these conversations continue, there is going to be a lot of movement here. We also have legislative concepts and budget proposals for the 23 legislative session around groundwater. And they're not just focused on the lower Umatilla Basin. They're really to begin to enhance our groundwater program overall. The groundwater statutes have been in place for a long time. They've not been refreshed or modernized. And we would like to bring together folks to talk about how that can be done. And there are some big conversations that need to happen around reuse, which includes this land application idea. Water reuse is important, and it is absolutely a part of a sustainable water management system in the state. And we need to be having conversations about how best to do it so that we're not creating bigger problems in these groundwater management areas. But we are requesting funding in the legislature around this, and looking to start those conversations and broaden them so that we're not just talking about, particular facilities or particular enforcement actions, because that really diverts the attention away, frankly, from the broader conversation that needs to be had. So all that to say, I think it would absolutely be ripe for a commission conversation in the coming year.
Commissioner Schleicher.
Thank you. I also just wanted to tie it back in with the special meeting that we had last week about the dairy air emissions petition, and just the impacts, the disparate impacts that specifically the community of Boardman and the surrounding area may be having due to both air emissions from the large dairy operations there, but also this groundwater contamination. And so I just wanted to bring that up again and recognize that that's an issue that I would like to get more information on in the coming year as well, about those sort of cumulative impacts.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Schlesser.
And I realize I'm to blame for this, but I'm tracking our time and just acknowledging that. So I'm gonna
Appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. Yes,
sorry.
let me just grab a couple of things here. Okay. I think I will skip to noting Zenith. I know that is the Zenith Oil Terminal is a topic of interest for a lot of folks out there. And just to clarify kind of where DEQ is at in that permitting process. So they have had, the facility has now had their land use compatibility statement approved by the city of Portland. So this was a primary, well, this is a primary component really to almost any permit application that we accept. A permit application for DEQ is not complete without that land use component. So they needed that land use component. They have come to agreement with the city in terms of conditions to cease all transloading of crude oil by 2027 to lower the plant site emission limit for VOCs, to cease operation of the asphalt refinery and require removal of 30 of the storage tanks, and to allow new construction of storage tanks only if it's for the purpose of renewable fuels. So these were the conditions of the LUX. With the LUX, they do have a complete application to renew their permit. And they have also now, at least electronically, submitted their application for an air contaminant discharge permit. I think we're still waiting on the hard copy and the fee that goes with that to actually have the official submittal date. But they will be moving to an ACDP because with the agreements in the land use compatibility statement, they're going to be reducing their emissions significantly. So that is going to move them from a Title V to an ACDP. We are still in the process of working on those permits. No permit has been issued and there is no permit out yet for public comment, but just want to assure folks that that's coming. There will be, of course, an opportunity for public comment on that. Okay. Let me also mention, maybe I will, just in the interest of time, only mention Next, because that came up, the Next facility that came up a lot yesterday. I do encourage commissioners to take a look at, when you have time, the Astoria Marine Construction Company bid, just in that it's a good news story. Sometimes cleanups take so long and they feel like they never come to an end, but sometimes they do. So there's a little bit of some good news there for you on that site. And so I encourage you to read about that. A lot of great work by our Northwest Region cleanup staff, in particular, Kevin Perrett and his staff. But to end with Next Renewables. So Next Renewables is, as you've heard now, quite a bit about. This is a proposal to construct a renewable diesel facility at the Port of Columbia County's Port Westward in Clatskanie. So this project does include for DEQ. Ultimately, the project will include air quality permitting, likely stormwater permitting, especially around construction of the facility, and a 401 certification, because there's a federal application needed to fill wetlands to construct this facility. So those are the components. It's a relatively large area. There's over 100 acres of wetlands that are proposed to be filled, and some small waterways. It does include, there would be mitigation components required under the federal authorization for the wetlands. You've heard a fair amount about our process. We have issued the air quality permit for the facility, and we have also thus far denied 401 certifications, and we do expect to get another application for 401 certification. My understanding is that Next is still working through their federal processes, and that to date, DEQ has not had enough information to process those 401 certifications. So what we do in that instance is we deny without prejudice. In other words, you just don't have enough information here. We're happy to take another look at this. I think you also have heard a bit about their land use issues, and the LUBA challenge. For DEQ's lane right now, that does not impact the air quality permit that we've issued. The air quality permit is for the facility. And really at this point, the company will need to figure out what the ultimate scope of their project is. Is it, going to include this rail yard if they get land use approval for that or not? And some of that will, certainly impact what their federal approvals look like, what the 401 looks like. It may impact the construction stormwater permit. We just don't know yet at this point. So this is certainly, we're going to continue to bring you updates. There's certainly nothing, finalized in terms of our permitting processes here. We still have a ways to go. And of course, these will all be public processes. I see Chair George has.
Thank you, Chair George.
Thank you. Leah, how many acres of wetlands did you say would be filled?
My understanding is approximately 117 acres.
Wow. So I've certainly been associated with projects that had impacts to wetlands and for which there had to be mitigation. But those were much, much, much smaller. And as I'm sure a lot of folks here are aware, the debate about, how well mitigation works, depending on what type of mitigation people are doing compared to the impact of existing wetlands. So is there no limit on how much wetlands can be filled? I mean, maybe that's a question for the Army Corps of Engineers, but nearly 120 acres, that seems like a, I think, frankly, unusually large wetland in many cases these days. And I'm a little surprised to hear that you could just do a project that would require filling 120 acres of wetlands.
Chair George, thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. This is really something they will have to get approval at the federal level. So they will, need to get their 404 dredge and fill permit, and then that for DEQ's piece, that would result in us looking at their application for a 401, where we have to then look at whether water quality standards for the state are met. My understanding in terms of the information I've been given, yes, 117 acres of wetlands for permanent fill. The compensatory mitigation that's currently being proposed is for 476 acres of wetlands to be mitigated around that area. But they're going to have to, this will be sorted out, I believe, through the environmental impact statement, which is what they are working on right now.
Okay. Well, thank you.
So I will stop there. And if anyone has any questions on the director's report, please feel free to let me know.
Chair George, is your hand still up, or a question about another section that wasn't stated?
It is. I know this will be very quick because I know we need to move on, but I just wanted to make one comment on the Bradford Island piece of the director's report. And it simply is this, as one Oregonian, I thank and encourage DEQ to continue this work as assertively as possible, and to encourage all other parties, EPA, Washington, and the Corps to get off the dime, so to speak. Folks have been aware of the very extreme levels of pollution at Bradford Island, and we know that people fish right around there. We know that there are treaty fishing areas and in lieu fishing areas right there. It's an incredibly important part of our fishery in the state of Oregon. And I probably, preaching to the choir a bit here, but it has been far too long to get this cleanup underway. So all encouragement and support to pursue that work. We can't get moving soon enough. So I will stop and thank you for the report.
And Vice Chair Brasso. Thank you, Chair George, and I'll just give 30 seconds to that. I appreciate you mentioning that. Just as a reminder for those watching and thinking about this, so that Bradford Island was listed on the national priorities list by EPA. And so in terms of just status update, what happens after that, it's a federal facility. It's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that's responsible for it. So when there's a site listed on the NPL, the next step is for EPA to enter into a federal facilities agreement with the federal entity that's responsible. So that's the stage that it's at right now. And just to affirm your sense of urgency on this, Chair George, we do feel the same way. And as I know, the state of Washington and Yakima Nation and EPA do as well. And so we are really trying to work towards that federal facilities agreement and get the work underway. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission on other parts of the agenda, other parts of the director's report? Let's go ahead and move us over to agenda item J, action delegation of rulemaking authority.
All right, good afternoon. It is now officially. I'm Nancy Bennett, interim deputy director, and want to bring an item today. So this is an action item asking the commission to delegate rulemaking authority to interim DEQ director Leah Felden for our asbestos fees. And if you're saying, well, didn't we already do that? The answer is yes. You had delegated this authority to the prior DEQ director, Richard Whitman. He's no longer with the agency, as we know, and so we need to take this action today to name interim director Felden to complete the process. Just a quick review of this. The purpose of the rulemaking is to make permanent the temporary rules for the asbestos program to increase fees. EQC approved the asbestos program fee increases at the May Commission meeting. However, the document approved contained errors, and two of the four intended types of fee increases were not properly included in that approval. DEQ proposed temporary rules to correct those errors at the July EQC meeting, and those were adopted. And at the same time, you delegated that permanent rule to the director. So we're here again. We're working on those permanent rules. They'll be completed in mid-December. I guess just sort of my reminder, or Gary can also talk a little bit about just sort of that delegation authority. We will be bringing some of these requests to you periodically just to make sure that you're spending your time on the most important policy issues. And the rulemaking development process, including requirements for public engagement and comment opportunities, remain the same. And the commission may rescind or modify its delegation through formal action at any time. So just a friendly reminder about that. And Stephanie, I think happy to answer any questions about this, but we have the motion here, I think, to make this change.
Thank you. Commissioner Kyle.
I think this one we can move straight to a motion. Unless there's discussion. I'd like to move that the Environmental Quality Commission delegate the 2020 asbestos program fee rulemaking to interim DEQ director Felden for its.
Have a second?
A second.
Okay. Commissioner Kyle makes the motion. Commissioner Schlesinger seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, all those opposed? All right. Motion passes. Thank you, Nancy.
Thrilled to put that one to bed for you.
Okay.
So, I mean, the reason they had to bring this before you again is because the statute actually requires a named person to be delegated.
Okay.
So it's clunky, but.
Housekeeping aisle 4.
Thank you.
Vice Chair, speaking of housekeeping,
Please.
do you mind if as we move into commission reports here, can we take a look at and confirm some dates for our next meetings? Would that be okay? Is that all right to do now?
Yeah, so we'll now just entertain dates for the next committee meeting, commission meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
So one date that we have looked at, December is a challenging month in many ways and for many people. But we are hoping to put on the schedule a special meeting for December 12. I don't think we'll need this full amount of time. Well, we may, I shouldn't say that, but a 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock PM window on December 12. And I'm interested to know if that would work for commissioners. This is for the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking proposal. And let me just also be clear, this is one item, so this would be virtual. We would not gather in person.
And what were the times again?
December 12th, 3 to 5 PM.
And that is a Monday.
That is a Monday.
I can make that work.
Yeah.
Yes, I can make that work also.
I can make that work. I see a thumbs up from Chair George. Commissioner Arlington?
I just don't know. I think I'm going to be in Washington DC that day, and I think it's likely I could make that work in a window back there, but I'm just not sure.
You back.
So how about I'm
What date do you return, Commissioner Addington?
It's a good question since I haven't bought my tickets yet, but I think
Okay.
I think I return. I think I'm traveling the 15th back and would be back in, working on the 16th.
Okay.
But I think, Leah, I mean, I'm a little reluctant to have you bounce around. I mean, it's quite possible that.
Oh, this is a big one, Greg. You don't get out of it.
Okay. Go ahead without me.
So I think what we'll do is we will get back to commissioners on this, but I would ask that maybe for the moment, we try and hold that 3 to 5 PM slot on the 12th. And maybe just for a quick check, the 19th, is that in that same time frame open for commissioners on December 19? Just so we have 2 that I can work with staff.
The 19th is actually better for me.
Okay.
I can do the 19th.
Okay.
Yeah, the 19th works. for me.
Yes.
A thumbs up from Chair George.
Okay.
Commissioner Addington, the following Monday, the 19th, 3 to 5 PM.
I think I can make that work. It might be from a car cell phone, but I think I can do it.
Okay, so we will confirm, but for the moment, to the degree possible, let's hold maybe both of those just for a bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The other calendaring question is for January. We originally had our meeting scheduled rather late in the month. We had holds for Thursday, the 26th and Friday, the 27th. We would prefer, if possible, to move that back a week. So January 2023, doing the EQC meeting on Thursday, the 19th and Friday, the 20th. Question is whether that does or does not work for commissioners.
That Friday does not work for me.
Okay. That's okay. That's why we're doing this. Okay.
So it's not, so no.
Do work for me,
Okay.
but if we need to adjust.
Okay. And how about Chair George and Commissioner Addington? I'm sorry, it wasn't quite looking up there.
It could work for me.
Okay.
Either way can work for me.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we have that information and we can, did the original dates work for you, Commissioner Barrasso?
The original dates did work for me.
The original did. And did the original dates still work for all commissioners in case we want to stick with that? Yes. Okay.
That's the previous week, right?
The 26, 27.
26 and 27th.
Wrong way.
Do we know where that would be?
I do not have the where on that at this time. I don't think we,
I was gonna say, since we'll be onboarding a new assistant, maybe we do it. here
yeah, I don't
first.
think we were planning to travel too far.
The 26th and 27th still work for me.
Okay, all right, well, that helps. So we'll get back to you and we'll confirm those.
Are the rest of the dates for 2023 posted somewhere?
Stephanie, let me ask you about that. Do we have our dates for the rest of 23 posted, or are we still nailing those down?
Thank you, Interim Director Feldon and commissioners. We do have most of them. There were one or two changes towards the end of the year based on prior commissioner availability discussions. So I will recirculate those after this meeting just to verify and reflecting the conversation today as well. And just to a note to location, we have tracked that likely in our January and March meetings, we will try to have joint meetings, at least partially, with our sister agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Agriculture. So those are, as well, Department of Forestry is usually one that we do. So some of those may be joint meetings, but likely that will be updated as we're able to confirm with those agencies.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you and look forward to hearing back and getting those dates. So we can get them calendared out for the rest of the year.
Thank you.
Let's turn things over to our last item on the agenda. Item K, informational commissioner reports. The Commissioner Slusher.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I will be brief. I just wanted to let the commission know and the agency know that I am no longer employed as a staff attorney with the Green Energy Institute at Lewis and Clark Law School. I am now a senior clean energy policy analyst for the Oregon Department of Energy.
Congratulations. Commissioner Kyle.
Well, I can give kind of updates to the board. I've been sitting on some of the hiring components of DEQs. So with regards to the internal auditor, we did have a good search. Unfortunately, the first and second choices have not accepted the position. So we may very well be kind of reopening that and trying to find some interim help perhaps in the meantime to kind of help. So we are still down an auditor. Just got the confirmation email there. And then also it's with Kathleen. So we're kind of meeting weekly with the hiring committee, Nancy as well. I can just kind of say at this point, we're pretty happy with the process. We did have to extend the initial application date, but I think that was a wise decision. And so now it is just kind of moving forward in such a way that we can execute the process, taking into consideration, the holiday seasons, so that kind of puts a big chunk in the middle, but yeah, busy time.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Makes OWEB look like a piece of cake, Greg.
Commissioner Addington, Commissioner Addington.
Thanks. OWEB, so I've been to my second OWEB meeting. It is a good group, Molly. I really have enjoyed some of those issues. Just because the EQC DEQ doesn't provide me enough reading material, I found my way to the grants committee, which is its own level of overwhelming. But no, it's good, and there's so many good projects that they're involved with. It's really a pretty neat thing. I would like to also just ask for a little bit of indulgence from the commission. Leah reported yesterday on the Klamath River dams, and I had planned on, as part of my director's report or my commission report, to say something about that. And what I'd like to do is just read you a portion of a statement that was sent out by the Klamath Water Users Association regarding this. And if you don't know, the Klamath Water Users Association, their members divert and deliver water to about 150,000 acres in Klamath County, as well as Modoc County and Siskiyou County in California. But there's some important things here that I just want to say as part of my report and put on the record. So the statement reads, today we are disillusioned, but not so much by the fact that the dams will be removed. KWUA took a neutral position on the 2016 amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which led to this FERC decision. We've kept our commitment to stay out of the way of parties that prioritize dam removal. Rather, we are disillusioned and disappointed that so many parties have turned their back on the Klamath Basin agricultural community and failed to honor reciprocal commitments made to producers in 2016. Above all, this means that parties to the amended KHSA failed to keep commitments to negotiate in good faith and to put into place a new water agreement by 2017. Dam removal is an experiment on a grand scale. We know for sure that irrigators will face new regulatory burdens due to salmonids occupying habitats they do not occupy today. We know for certain that project irrigators face risks of new financial burdens associated with infrastructure historically operated by Pacificor that will instead now be operated by the Bureau of Reclamation. It appears the Klamath Basin's goals for state and federal administrations and others is to remove the dams and be sure to spend money currently available for restoration activities and nothing more. That is not a plan for stability or peace. And it goes on, but I appreciate you letting me put that into the record. And I just want to say, I mean, I've got an intimate knowledge of this. I know people who have worked on this for decades. This is a crowning achievement for many people who I consider friends. And so I'm not trying to minimize that, but the state of Oregon and DEQ has been a party to this agreement for a very long time. And there are big gaps. It's just not as simple as taking dams out and thinking everything's going to be fine. It's not. And so if we don't pay attention to these other things, which include restoration, but there's big issues for the agricultural community and a lot of commitments that were made that nobody's paid any attention to. With that, I also, so I'm going to close the book on that. I also want to say, I think you all know I said it last time, Monday is my first official day as the executive director full-time for the Oregon Farm Bureau. I don't know yet what that means for my service on the commission. I've talked with Gary and Leah and others in the Ethics Commission. I think there's just a question of, you know, is it appropriate and just from a capacity standpoint, whether it's possible or not. So I have no plans at the immediate future, but I think I'm going to try to spend some time and figure that out over the next month or two. So that's it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Commissioner Addington. Chair George.
Thank you all very much. So probably most of my report is similar to Molly's comment on our work on the recruitment. That, as she said, takes up time every week, as well it should. It's critically important, and that isn't going to slow down any. In fact, it's going to speed up as we move into the next phases. But as Molly said, the extension was a good idea. We got definitely more applicants and are in the kind of place that we want to be as we move forward into starting to vet those. And of course, after a couple of steps, the final candidates will come back to the EQC for consideration. So that's moving along quickly. One of the things I wanted to mention is, you know, so much work that we do here these days, whether it's from, you know, low carbon fuels or cleaner cars and trucks or air quality work. So much of the work we do has at least influence on the issues of climate change and climate protections. And interesting from a tribal perspective, which is, you know, I live in two worlds, as our elders say. So I live in a tribal world, and then I also live in the larger world. It's fascinating to learn more and more from our cultural practitioners about the effects that they're seeing. One of the traditional foods, one of the first foods of our people is acorns, and harvesting those. It's not something that's been a part of my past, but I was very fortunate to get to go to Acorn Camp down in Southern Oregon at the base of Table Rock and meet there with Grand Ron and Siletz tribal members where we camp together and we harvest, or we hope to harvest and process acorns together as a community. But it was really fascinating to see acorn gatherers from around the state, or at least Western Oregon, say that our native oaks, our native Oregon white oak and California black oak, didn't put out acorns this year. And nobody's really sure why, but they think maybe it has to do with the kind of climate signals that come in the spring. And the European oaks, I can say in my own yard, have plenty of acorns, but this was really strange. And all the people their families have been collecting and harvesting and processing acorns for generations has experienced this before. They said it's not unusual for that to happen in a place, some particular area of the state, but then you can go north, or you can go south, or you can go up in elevation, or you can go down in elevation and find acorns. So it was really kind of troubling to hear that whether the people were from up the Portland area or down by Table Rock or out near the coast, there's no new acorns this year. And so I just wanted to mention it. And again, we're not really sure of the cause, but there's no blight or disease that's visible in the trees. So interesting to just think about for me as a tribal leader, as our tribal people are working really hard to save and preserve and promote the healthy indigenous foods that we know are good for our people. We seem to be seeing more and more impacts that we don't understand and we can't find other solutions for. So I just thought I would mention that as one aspect of impacts to Native people here in Oregon. And then I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and say to my colleague and friend, Greg Addington, I hear you. I want to say out loud, I hear you, and I hear what you're sharing, and I hear what you share about the concerns and the worries and the challenges that will come with this action in the Klamath Basin for friends that you have and people you know and who work there. And you of course, are much more engaged. You're a part of the community there and have worked on this for years. And we both know and have friends within the tribal community there as well. And so while I want to acknowledge and honor those concerns and say that I hear them, in my own way, I'm also obligated to at least give credit to the people who have worked on this for so long. And there have been so many false starts and close to success and then, come to disappointment. So I do have to, at the same time, hold up my tribal cousins down there and the work of the Klamath tribe to persistently advocate for what was necessary to restore salmon, their traditional and native food, to their lands. And we know that these issues are hard. If they were easy, they would have got fixed years ago. They are very hard because there's very real impacts on both sides. And I have to celebrate that for my cousins down there, that they will have a sacred traditional food, we hope returned before too terribly long. And nothing is going to change about the need for people to come to the table and work together and try to find better solutions. So want to do that in acknowledgement of the ongoing challenges there. So thank you.
Okay, so I think that brings it to me. I just want to appreciate Chair George and Commissioner Addington for being patient with us through this meeting yesterday. I don't have much by way of commissioner report, so I think I will just leave it there and turn things back over to Interim Director Felden to see if there's anything else before we adjourn this meeting not too far off from our scheduled time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. Yes, thank you for keeping us moving and keeping us close to on time today. I'll just take a moment I appreciate what Commissioner Addington had to say and what Chair said, and reflect I think similarly that, Chair George, I think you said it, that these issues are very complex and, we know that the issues around the Klamath Basin are very complex. And certainly when folks began talking about agreements with capital A's years ago, there were many more facets and components to what those agreements would look like and who all they would serve. And Commissioner Addington is right. Those did not come to fruition in the way that I think all the parties originally thought that they would, and didn't necessarily result in outcomes for all of those who came to the table to start those conversations. What's happened now in terms of the dam removal is a success for some facets of the conversation, and I think it is necessary on many fronts. But to Commissioner Addington's point, the conversations aren't over. The dam removal really starts a next phase of things that need to occur. But like I said, it does not satisfy all the needs for all the users in the region. And so, this is complex. And with these complex issues, it's going to take continued conversation and folks coming to the table. So I just want to appreciate all of the perspectives that have been brought forward in the last several minutes on this, and note that, I think it's a great reflection that we have a commission that does bring so many facets to these environmental conversations. The work of DEQ is complex and it is multifaceted, and we do our work better with all of these perspectives on the commission. So I appreciate this commission and bringing forward your own perspectives. I think it makes our work better. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Feldman. Okay, with that, thank you all. Thank you all in the public for joining us, and look forward to seeing folks in December when we nail down that date. And so with that, I will ask if we have a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay, don't see any opposed. Meeting is adjourned. Greg, safe journey up. Bye now. Have a great
And
weekend.
thank you all. We will now close the Zoom recording.